Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. It has been a while. It has been more than just a couple of minutes since we have come to you, but we are back because things are happening and it's time, Brandon. It's just time.
Oh, it's long overdue.
hmm It's time. So I am Seahawks Brendan Nelson, and I am joined once again for the first time in a couple months by Brandon of the Hawks Nest. And we're joining because the season is just about here. The off season, which is far too long, has finally expired. So, Brandon, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, as you say, hyped up because we're just about to head towards a season that has been, I think, as exciting heading into it as either you and I have run into in quite a long period of time. So it just
hmm
gets you a little extra juiced.
Definitely. So, this stream is going to be all about kind of catching up on what's happened over the last couple months, but straight up, not a lot happened over that couple month period. So we're going to get through that quickly. And then we're going to talk about initial impressions from this year's training camp. And there have been quite a few. There's been quite a few interesting things coming out of training camp so far. So that's the plan for today. And then, of course, we got the mock game tomorrow night, and we've got the preseason game in a week. So we are just about there. Real quick, though, just a little bit of business, I guess. I just want to say one thing. I streamed 2 days ago, and right as I turned the stream off, I had one user, John Stillwell, do a $30 donation and also gift 10 elite memberships.
Let's go,
But
John.
yeah, but unfortunately, I didn't see it until hours later because I had just turned the stream off. So, John
Okay.
Stillwell, if you are watching, thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry I didn't get you when you did it, but it was just when I turned the stream off. So, thank you, John.
I got John's contact too, so I'll make sure he gets the message. I know him, but
All right.
you're awesome, John, as ever.
Oh, yeah. John is awesome. But yeah, now let's go ahead and swing into the off season because it was 2 pretty slow months. Nothing was happening. I think the last thing this team did last time we met up was Mario Edwards got signed. I think that was the last thing we did. And then the team just kind of went dormant. And it wasn't like last offseason either, where there was a lot of mystery. Last year, we didn't know who our quarterback was. We didn't really know who any of our offensive linemen were going to be. We had questions about some of the guys on defense. There was a lot of mystery. There isn't quite as much this offseason. So I think most Seahawks fans were just kind of chill, just kind of waiting. And then right before training camp, we got two moves. And let's spend a little bit of time on these moves because both these moves I kind of qualify as being the team committing itself to the roster that they have a little bit. So first thing they did was they extended star edge rusher, breakout 2022 edge rusher, Uchenna Nwosu, to a 3-year deal, 3 years on top of the money he already had, worth the extension about $45 million. Plus, there are apparently $6 million in escalators in the final year. So, how did you feel about the Uchenna Nwosu extension?
I wasn't sure if it was going to happen because of the fact that there's really not much the team gains by doing it, since, as you can see on the final numbers, you're not really saving any money by putting him on an extension because of how much he's due, by how much a bump he's going to get by the level of play he's playing. But I don't have a problem with the deal. I think that it's money well spent. The cap is going to go up, and he's going to look right along in the spot where his production matches what his pay is, as long as, of course, he does stay healthy. But I've loved this guy from day one. He has come here as a player, and he's been a good all-around player. You saw it in that first Denver game where he was really all over the place, all over that field. He's more than just being a competent pass rusher. He showed you what an advanced pass rusher looks like with his moves and his ability to set up tackles and things that's been kind of missing from here in Seattle for quite a bit of time when it comes from a player coming off the edge. And he's also a guy that has steadily improved over every single year of his career, including besting his career highs with the Chargers in his final year, and then besting that career high by double across the board, basically, in his first year with Seattle. So you may not also be at a place with this player where you've hit his ceiling quite yet. Maybe there's not a lot left, Brendon, but he has a guy that's, you can see that is that kind of player that just, he's working his butt off to get better and better, and it shows. So I think it's a good move.
Right. And the thing to keep in mind here is we are probably a couple weeks away from a Nick Bosa extension, and then we're a year away from a Micah Parsons extension. So these edge guys, they're going to start looking for a lot more money very soon here because Bosa's probably getting 30 a year.
I'm hearing potentially 34.
Really? Okay, that would shatter the ceiling.
It would, but that's also, if you add up to it, you got Aaron Donald setting the bar at 31.5. That's now a contract that was signed a year ago. So inflation kicks in on it. And then you have him coming off a defensive player of the year. I mean, it's kind of the worst time to have to sign a player if you're a team like San Francisco, as they're coming off their best season. And you know he's going to want every other dime already, just like his brother did, not to fault him for it. But that doesn't, to me, that means that you're going to have to push the negotiations past what Donald made.
So what does Parsons get if Bosa gets 34? Does he get 38, 39? Like
it probably goes more 35-ish. This is the jump. This is the jump to get you over Donald, because obviously the rest of the edge rush market stays in the 20s range and kind of mid 20s at that, even on the high side. So Parsons not going to be able to come in there and say, pay me, 20% more than what the last guy made. But I think that Bosa can say, pay me 20% more than what Donald made.
Yeah. But obviously Nwosu wouldn't ask for top of the market, but he would ask for whatever's fair, and what's fair would change dramatically after those extensions come in. So I think it was a good time to go ahead and take care of this now. And also it did free up a little bit of money, freed up about $3 million this year,
did it?
which initially we owed him 13. Now we owe him 10 this year. And that's actually that matters, because I'll say the exact numbers in a second, but we are kind of up close to the ceiling here. We're getting pretty close.
We are. We've got a lot of flexibility with some of the money. I know that we'll be talking about this in conjunction with the other moves made, but there's some flexibility John Schneider has created that for guys like you and myself who turn over every option and wonder about all the possibilities, how you could do things efficiently to maximize that chunk of change that you've now sort of created. It gets your mind running wild a little bit.
Real quick here. Oh, Eric Tams, thank you for the $10 super chat. Loving the recent coverage. I'm loving that you're loving it.
Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, I see you streaming a couple times a week over there on the Hawk's Nest. I'm posting videos a few times a week as well, now a few times a day because things are happening. So yeah, we're finding ways to make this offseason interesting, even in the slowest of the slow times.
You ain't kidding, man. The June, early July, late May was a desert. As far as for information or coverage.
Right. Okay, so the other move, which was made pretty much right after the Nwosu extension, was the restructuring of one Quandre Diggs's contract to free up about $6 million, pushing it into 2024, and also increasing his dead cap hit by about that amount if he is released before next season. So Quandre Diggs, his cap hit goes down this year. We save about $6 million. And we push it into the future. So this one, mixed feelings from the fan base, I think. Where did you come down on this one?
Well, I mean, we're going to see what the nature of the beast is on this one, but I'm going to lean into trying to take a couple, with me, I try to take a couple steps beyond what we're seeing just in the moment and try to put 2 and 2 together. And if you are going to create cap space like they have, I guess a little bit with the Jenna deal, where you create a little bit with it on that deal, where you could have just stood pat and rode that out the year and see where it went, but you didn't. You got on top of that. Then the Quandre coming in, you're saving money on that deal, and then you don't have another deal that's in the chamber. There's not something now to follow along with it that's immediately afterwards of creating that cap space with Quandre. That gets me to thinking that right now what John Schneider wants is some flexibility with his cap. But he is also, in a way, getting ready to pounce. I know that some of that money's got to be used towards practice squad, and they like to keep a little bit of a buffer there for the injury protection. But there still should be a good chunk of change there if they wanted to go make a go-for-it move. And maybe this is not a move that we see now or even around the end of training camp. Maybe this is a trade deadline deal move. But I think that money is going towards that. And one of the things that I harp upon is that if you're going to choose to be a contender in a given season and you're going to choose to go for it a given year, then go for it. It doesn't mean you have to sell out your future. It doesn't mean that, it's just do the Ram style of business where you're just going to basically kill yourself for 3-4 years of future cap for one season. But it does mean that there's kind of a happy medium in there that you can find. And I like the thought of them doing that at this point in time. We'll deal with the Quandre, situation when it comes down the line, but I'm very okay with doing it because this is going to be in the nature of now creating more competitive team this year, putting us into a closer state to actually contend.
Right, right. So Diggs's cap hit, just so everybody's kind of on the same page here. Diggs's cap hit next year, 21 million, but it's about half that if he's released, the dead cap hit. So that's still actually something that could happen. So I don't think this marries us to him, but it makes it less likely that you would do something to move off of him. I think that is fair to say.
I agree. And let's also walk that a little bit more into the future too. You don't know what you got in a 6th round pick in Jarek Reed, if he's really going to be able to go up there and ascend into Diggs' spot. It would seem to me like the team is sort of already sort of slow playing a little bit of what, unless Jamal Adams really comes out and bounces back this year. If he comes back and has an injury season, that's your cut there. There's your major one to come down in the secondary. And you're not going to probably cut both safeties, I would guesstimate. If you're going to cut one, I would, especially a guy like Diggs, who is a leader in that locker room, who is still playing pretty good football at the end of the day. It's not like he's fallen off or had a huge injury problem. He still came back and played every game last year after that nasty foot injury. So I think you have a little bit more confidence there that, he can go another year. We're not likely to cut him. We're probably cutting Jamal. We got Julian to fit into Jamal's spot if we have to go that round. It'd be great if Jamal plays. Don't get me wrong. I'm not rooting for this to happen with Jamal, but I think that this is okay because of that, because you're also looking forward a little bit under those assumptions, I think.
Yeah, Diggs has spoken a little bit about how last year during training camp and preseason, he basically couldn't run because he was coming back from the injury. And he's talked a little bit about how this year is different. So I would expect him to be better this year than he was last year. And I don't think he was bad last year. He wasn't as good as he usually is. But I think that Diggs is a very safe bet to have a bounce back season. I will say that.
I do too. And I think that we don't, in a lot of ways, you could make the argument with Diggs is that he's been a bit underrated by the fan base, including myself in my outlook of him. And, when you go through this May and June period, like we have, Brendon, it's been a lot of me kind of just diving through all 22 tape to look for stuff that I can put together for future videos on players and this and that. And, I had this moment where Diggs was doing something on tape that stood out to me that was so unusual for this defense. Because you drop to cover 3, you go to cover 3. You drop to quarters, you go to quarters. And I saw him doing something where he does this instinctive move where he starts to drop to depth. And as you're seeing the far shot from the L-22, so you can see him dropping to depth. But then suddenly he sees something occur in this Raiders game, which causes him to jump the route. And, I asked him about it, and he gave me a great response on Twitter in regards to it. But it's the intelligent nature of his play, I think, that is maybe as much as anything that we don't note as much, because it's one of those hard items that isn't as calculable when it comes to statistical production. It is something that you have to kind of see in those moments to kind of spot it and go, oh, that's it right there. And I agree with you. I don't think he had a bad year last year. I think I've said many times, as you and I have talked about these injuries with these players, people will say a guy's coming back, so we'll be fine on this. And we always say, well, they'll be back, but they've been rehabbing all off season. And players all the time, over and over again, will speak to the fact that if I had to rehab that whole offseason rather than train, rather than maximize my physical potential for a given season, I'm not going to be at my utmost best, whether I'm coming off of a major injury or just a little sub injury that makes me rehab all the time and take away from that time period. So makes sense, adds up. I think that he's going to go out there and play well. One last thing on this, Brendon, the main issue I think that a lot of fans have with Quandre at the forefront, and what I hear from him on, is the tackling. And the issues with him not being consistent enough. I think some of this is a little bit of a symptom of your front 7 not getting the work done. And if you put him in less of a position with the front 7, not letting those guys bleed through all the time on the back end, he's not going to be put into as many of those situations to have to, tackle in the open field the guy that outweighs him by 40, 50 pounds at times. Not 40, 50, but like 30, 35.
Yeah, and that's an important thing. You keep him cleaner. It's like linebackers look better when the defensive line is taking up all the blockers, right? And
Exactly.
free safeties look better when they're not having to make tackles because running backs aren't getting to them at all. So I definitely buy that. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. I have a lot. I'm really on board with Quandre coming back this year. And I think bold prediction for me, Brendon, we'll be doing a prediction show at some point, but my bold prediction for Quandre this year is he has more interceptions as a Seahawk this given season than he ever has. That he's got more to work with up front than we've ever had. He's got as good a secondary around him as they ever had. They're running a different style of coverages, because part of what allowed him, Brendon, to jump that route was you weren't running cover 3, you're running quarter, half. So it's, and because when your cover 3 safety is the center field safety, you can't go jump something because you're the guy in the deep end who's got to cover everything up. If you jump and somebody gets behind you, there's no protection for your corners at that point. But if you have a quarter half or any other kind of coverage where cover two, you've got at least other guys at depth at that point to clean things up. And so you can go and take that opportunity if it does present itself. So I think those opportunities are going to present themselves a little bit more this year, with Seahawks transitioning away a little bit from that cover three stuff, a little bit more to a varied amount of coverages rather than just locking on one wholesale.
All right, we got a few more donos here. David Pugh, thank you for the $49.99. David Pugh, by the way, a new channel member courtesy of John Stillwell, I think. I think he was one of the 10. So shout out John and shout out David. First off, welcome back, B&B. Thank you.
It's good to see you, David.
Mm-hmm. Secondly, I see some weirdos panicking already based on camp highlights on Jalen Carter because we clearly missed out. I'd say two things. One, chill out and give Spoon a chance. And two, I'd say 31 teams missed out on JSN, baby. Okay, so few things to unpack here. Definitely a few different things to go into here because, I mean, I've seen plenty of the Jalen Carter stuff since camp started. I'm sure you have too.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the important thing to keep in mind here is we did not pass on Jalen Carter because we thought he was bad at football. I don't think that's the reason why we decided to not select him. I don't think that's the reason why anybody who didn't select him chose not to select him if you look at those other teams that passed on him either. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense to watch some highlights in training camp where he looks good and think that other teams must be completely blindsided. Like, wow, Jalen Carter's good at football. I'm shocked. No, I don't think that's the case. That's not why we didn't draft him.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's the talent was there. We don't know how the meeting went between Schneider and Carroll. We don't know what the background checks were. And that stuff is something you've got to go to where when you're picking the top 10, Brendon, I don't think you can sorry, I got dogs over here. I don't think you can as easily come here. I don't think you can as easily just, slide into taking risks when you're picking in the top 10. The Eagles could because they had multiple first rounders, because they were coming on the back of a Super Bowl appearance, because Howie Roseman's reputation is as high right now as it's ever been. And that guy's been there when they've won a Super Bowl. So, he has the goodwill built up right now for this decision to go wrong. Not to mention they've got Georgia East out there surrounding Jalen. So he's got this whole support group of people throughout getting drafted that are like, stay on the straight and narrow, stay on the straight and narrow. Don't do nothing. Stay on the thing. Would he have that same kind of support structure out here in the Pacific Northwest? Maybe, maybe not. And I was as big a backer of Jalen Carter as anybody. I had him mocked to us up to the last fifth mock that I ran for our Hawks. On draft day, Brendon, I had this whole Freudian moment where, you got your scroller beneath you and you're trying to keep it updated on who's being drafted. And our Hawks had picked Witherspoon. I think I'd kept Carter up for like an hour and a half. just as I'm trying to talk the audience into Witherspoon, by the way, as a lot of the audience is bailing on the pick, and I'm just trying to talk him into like, no, it's a fine pick with Witherspoon. Meanwhile, I'm not changing my scroller, just letting it roll through this. So it's going to cause, this is going to be inevitable that you and I are going to be doubling back around to this a variety of different times because fans are going to be paying attention to this. And it was tough at first with Witherspoon going out there before they got the pads on, where he had a couple rough moments. Lockett really put him in the spin cycle in one spot and then went past him in the open field where you're like, whoa, where's the speed? Tyler Lockett just outran you, after he had to turn around. From a dead stop, basically. But then the pads come on, and now we start to hear about some things with him. You start to see, he's got a great big hit on. He puts on Eskridge. They got a nice picture of where he just looks like he's just about to cleats Eskridge on a particular play. And he's out there with his physicality showing up, and he's looking a little more improved. He is a guy that's a little bit late to camp because he was a couple days behind where everybody else is. So, both of these two guys can end up being great players. But I think, Brendon, when I come down to it as a general manager and taking that kind of risk as a fifth pick in the draft, having to make that kind of risk, like you just mentioned too, there's so many other teams that weren't willing either. I don't think that that's what you want to be doing when you're picking that high in the draft, is be taking risks. You're okay to do it later on in the first round. But when you're talking top 5 and there's other safer players who are going to be good without the characteristics or character background checks, it's smart money to lean that way.
And also, unfortunately, I didn't see this until after the draft. I think if I had seen this before the draft, I would have had a very different stance on things. But that whole thing about how Georgia's coaching staff apparently trashed Carter Like did you saw this, right? You're familiar with this?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, they had this whole report about how they were thrilled he was gone and they all hated him, even though he was the best player on a team that won 2 national titles. If I had seen that before the draft, I think that would have been really hard for me to get over. That like that's very weird. Generally speaking, it seems like coaches will stand up for their players almost no matter what if they feel like they accomplished things together. So I don't know. If I had seen that before the draft, I may have come into the draft with a different take on that whole situation. That to me was like, wow, what happened here?
You're right to note it, because think of it beyond that too. You have to recruit in the future, and you want to be able to go to any recruits you go in the future, and you go, we'll put you through the process, we'll train you up, we'll turn you into a pro-ready player, and then once you're about to get drafted, we'll bump you up and hype you up and make sure that you're getting all the praise that you properly need to get in order to get drafted as high as you possibly can be. Okay, well, that kind of goes against that, doesn't it, Brendon? To your point. Right. And if they're going to go that extreme to do that on top of that, then that does mean that perhaps somebody got stung a little bit deep on that one a little bit. And I'm with you. These are things that, I love Carter, but you can't deny that there was smoke around this fire as far as the character stuff. And you're not even talking about the fact we don't even know what the file looked like. Mm-hmm. You and I don't know what the Schneider file that he had with the private investigators and all the people on the scene of Georgia, all the connections to the coaching staff that are developed from a variety of different places from within your own building in the front office. What did that thing say? Beyond all this peripheral stuff, what was that exactly that stood out that, was at the forefront? So I think people have got to make their peace a little bit with Carter not being here. The Eagles were in a really advantageous position to do this, and we weren't in that advantageous position. And Witherspoon, some of this too, Brendon, of course, comes out of people being a little upset with Witherspoon going into the slot. That's some of this too, that's, I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit about, but that's also where some of this is growing out of as well. But I think at the end of the day, Witherspoon's going to be a player in this league. He's going to help us win football games. He's not going to be a bust. Carter may also be a really good player as well. But it makes sense in retrospect. It really does.
Right. I mean, think about it like this, guys. If Jalen Carter decides tomorrow he wants to retire from football, he just decides that, I don't know, maybe he wants to go be in the next Fast and Furious movie or something. The Eagles are still favored to go to the Super Bowl, I think. Yeah. Do you think that's fair? Like that?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that would be bad. That's probably fair. That's probably fair.
Mm-hmm. So they're in this very unique position that no other team's really in. So you got to think about things from that perspective too.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And let's see here. I'd say 31 teams missed out on JSN. Yeah, hold that thought on JSN. We're definitely going to have to talk about him because
baby. Yes.
That's the compelling thing from this training camp so far, I would say.
Agreed. I think that's the story in camp right now.
Yeah. Narc Diaries, thank you for the $4.99. Kelly here, just got back from camp. I got a Geno autograph. So cool. Kenny M, I think that's McIntosh, is great with the fans. DK, nice day. Sharbs, J Love, and Trey, nicest guys. Yeah, they're talking about Kenny McIntosh too. They are talking about him. There's some buzz.
Clips have been legit too. I mean, those clips, I know it's not in full pads when you're seeing some of that stuff, but those cuts and that vision, that stuff that will translate to the field when they start getting after it.
Right. I heard about DK's nice day today. Sharbs was back in practice today, so crisis averted there. So yeah, pretty cool. I haven't been able to make it out to training camp this year. I've done it before, but I'm probably not going to do it this year. What about you?
It's going to have to be a next year thing for sure. And I think I'm eventually get to maybe moving back to the west side, just open, make this a little bit easier to get out there and do that. But no, I haven't had a chance to get out there this year. It's been good watching. They've got some good cut-ups and looks like the fans are making their presence felt, which is awesome. But I missed it. I wanted to, Brendon, but it's been a weird tight time for me as far as just time wise goes. Right. And so I got to drive like 5 hours over there to get over there for training camp. So it's a commitment. It truly is. But Sharp's coming back is good news. I was worried about that, Brendon, because Carol was talking about him in a real almost grim like fashion when he was, there was, I don't know. We'll be looking at it. Whenever he does that, whenever he does, Carol does this move. I don't know. We'll be having to look at that. We'll just see what goes on with it. Whenever he gets completely energyless and that's when you get worried about him when he starts talking about guys like that. But Trey Brown seems like he's bounced back better this year in training camp. And Julian Love looks like he's going to be worth every last penny of what we spent for him in free agency, which is not a big contract.
Right. Also, Narc Diaries, thank you for the $1.99. Met Eskridge and he hugged a boy next to me. Well, Eskridge is going to have a very interesting training camp in preseason, I think. It could be his roster spot could be on the line. So, going to be very interested to keep an eye on him.
I am too. He gets a lot of hype, Brendon, and every player's not every player, but Lockett, Gino, DK, all in press conferences have talked him up this offseason. Gino's talked about working with him privately. But then you get a couple of cuts again that I come back to with him and I go, but this is the little bit of the issues that still remain in his game that were a problem for me going back to him with college. I don't know if you saw the one play with Sherman on the sidelines watching, and he runs that little zipper release route, where the receiver first starts in on a straight line and then goes back out on a straight line to the pylon, essentially, when you're down by the goal line. And he ran the route beautifully, explosively, stop and start in an instant, gets back out of his route. Sherman's watching. So it's a fun video because you got Sherman right in front of you and you got the play happening in front of Sherman. So you're getting to watch Sherman's reaction the whole way. And he pulls off the whole route. And then right at the end of the route, ball comes in right in his hands, body catch, boom, 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 dribbles out of his hands. And then there's a later on one where there's a Julian Love interception where he's playing like a single high safety in one of the cut-ups I saw. And the quarterback, I think, is Gino, launches it out there to Eskridge on a deep route. And he's looking at probably seeing Julian Love back there, strong safety playing single high. And he's like, I'll attack that. And Julian Love ends up jumping over Eskridge to go make the play. And Eskridge doesn't really track the ball, doesn't really get up into the air to high point at that point. And it's an interception. And it's not his fault. Like, it's not probably great throw or decision making on the play either. But these are those little things with me with him on the catching, the body catching, the ability to reach out and go get it, the high pointing ball stuff you didn't see a lot of in college at times from him that you're hoping is maybe a little bit more of growth in his game because he needs to widen as a receiver if he's going to widen more of his time on the football field, I think, especially with this roster or even keeping the roster like you talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting. From what I'm hearing in camp, it seems like he's doing everything right until the point where he needs to actually go make a play on the ball or catch the ball, and then not so much. So that's going to be tough. The good news is we don't necessarily need a big year from him so much as we just need him to be depth and maybe a special teamer. So at least he's not going to have some expectations of a 60 catch season or anything, I don't think.
I think it could be odd where JSN's presence actually ends up keeping him on the roster in a very strange way because he doesn't have to now be that slot guy. And now you can just accommodate him into that manufactured role where you're just getting some touch here, getting him into just certain packages here and there, as opposed to having to commit him into the slot and then kind of working around some of those deficiencies in route running and catching that you can't have in the slot. Just a thought.
Yeah, and maybe we keep him around just to be a punt returner or a kick returner because I suspect he might be pretty good at that stuff if you're willing to put him in that position, which is dicey, but it could be done if you don't have a burning need for him at receiver.
Especially if the NFL adopts that CFL kick coverage thing that I saw. They're turning over.
I did hear about that.
Looks interesting. I'm for it, man. It looks cool. I'll tell you. And you have a guy like Eskridge that's got that Insta Percy gear to him. Mm-hmm. That's those guys that would flourish down there if they run it that way. Would be that guy right there, So,
right. Eric Tams, once again, thank you for the $10. Seen JSN in training camp. It appears he's not lost anything from the injury. Where do you think he would have been drafted if teams knew he was good to go? All right, this is an interesting one. He was the first receiver taken, so it's not like somebody else took a receiver that would have been JSN if they knew he was good to go. But, I mean, most of the big boards had him higher than 20. I do remember this.
They did. I think his he was probably around a consensus 8 to 12 range, depending on whose board you were looking at. You knew the consensus board better than I off the top of your head, but that's where it felt like he was around there.
Yeah, I think PFF had him 9th, and that was the highest. Everywhere else had him in like the low teens. I can't remember what the aggregate had exactly, but it was higher than 20 for sure. I kind of expected Houston to stay pat at 12 and take him. So obviously, they traded that pick, but I still think that could have happened even with them not knowing he was good to go necessarily. So if they knew he was good to go, probably somewhere around there. I don't know to who, though, because there wasn't necessarily a team that had some dying need for a receiver. Maybe we see a team trade up to get him, like the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's still missing that final year of production, even in a good to go state. You know, if he had a final year of production and he's good to go, does he go higher? Does he go probably like you say to Texans or into the top, sneak into the top 10? Sure. If he's just good to go though, on the back of having not played a whole final year, in my opinion, no, he would still go where he went, because it wasn't really about, for me, it wasn't really about the general managers worrying about his hammy and if that was something that was going to heal. That's not known as being a long-term chronic injury within the NFL. The problem was you didn't have the final year of production, and you only had 1 year of production in college, and you had that only 1 year of production in college in the slot, and you only had that 1 year of production in the slot while he had 2 first-rounders playing on either side of him and CJ Stroud throwing him in the football. So to me, that was more what got him, dropping a little bit. If you look at the recent history, Brendon, I guess Drake London may have been one of the more recent ones, but there haven't been many guys in the top 12 taken at the receiver position that don't run a 4.4.
Yeah. I kind of agree with that. And usually the guys who go that high tend to be guys who can play on the outside, which we don't know if JSN is yet.
Yeah.
Like the way some people were talking about JSN, it was like he was some Calvin Johnson level prospect, which I didn't totally get. No. Although maybe I'm starting to get it now that with what they're saying. I mean, who knows?
Well, and it's certainly something we got to talk about with it, because like we say, this is the story of camp. I think part of it too is the value of slot in the NFL, like the slot corner. It's like, this is a newly evolving situation, and it's happening before our eyes, where the transition away from just being these outside 2 guys as far as your receiving core is the one that you have to worry about. And the slot's always been a part of football in recent history. It's not like it's just not been there for teams, but becoming almost as important, if not sometimes surpassing what you're trying to get on the outside. Cooper Kupp has surpassed what the Rams have gotten on the outside from other guys. Amon St. Brown has surpassed what other guys have gotten there with the Detroit Lions as that slot guy inside. So this is a little bit, I think, about the increased productivity you can get out of this position and how much more can be impactful. Justin Jefferson the same way. Mm-hmm. So, it's a new thing. And this is one of the reasons we got a lot to pick for the Seattle, is that it's not only a great value at 20, considering the consensus boards you just talked about, but this is also a player that you're looking for with the forward thinking mentality of this is where the game is going. This is how we're going to be able to attack in the near future, as football is always in that ever changing way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really just comes down to how often you put 3 receivers out there. Like on a team like the Rams that is in 3 receiver sets basically, I think 94% of the time. What's the difference between JSN and an outside receiver? Not a whole lot. Like, he's on the field just as much. And honestly, he might be more productive because those slot guys tend to get involved a little bit more. So It just all depends on usage. But yeah, you can absolutely make this work.
And don't you think that Waldron's wanted to probably run some of the stuff that he's sorry to interrupt you, but wanted to run some of what has there with McVay, going back to a bit of the, some of the base in this offense. And he hasn't been able to do so in recent history because you haven't had the guys. Eskridge couldn't stay healthy his first year, and then last year still couldn't stay healthy. And then Goodwin was out for pretty much most of the year. And he's not even really.
Yeah, Goodwin got hurt like 3 separate times last year. He was really good when he played, though. He was.
He was, but even the San Diego game, where that's his most productive game, and that's only his most productive game because DK went down and he went to the outside, not because of necessarily what he was doing from within the slot. But he was, I'll get you, he was at least functional for you. But I think that's been a big thing holding back the offense at times. They've leaned into the 2 tight end, 3 tight end sets, but I'm sure Waldron wants to go back to more of that stuff.
Yeah, real quick, looking at the draft this year, teams that I think may have at least considered JSN if he had another all-world season last year. Atlanta at 8 would be the highest I could see because they have nothing after Drake London. And then I'd say the Titans at 11, the Packers at 13, and maybe the Patriots at 17. It would be probably slotted somewhere in there.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So go ahead.
But I think we do got to know with him that I was just thinking on this the other day. It kind of just occurred to me because I've been around a lot of training camps, Brendon. I was following the team back when they were in their Cheney days, and all you would have was the news stories from the 2 different newspapers. You had the Times and you had the Herald, and sometimes you get you could sometimes get the Tacoma News Tribune in there every once in a while before the internet age. And you always get certain bits of hype or certain bits of pieces on rookies of players. I know for sure that I've never heard of a rookie wide receiver getting this much hype, seeing this much clips coming out of this I don't know if I've seen a rookie period in Seahawks history that I can remember getting it's not even just the praise, Brendon. It's just the complete and utter, and it's not bad, but it's just the hype coming from it. Those every other day, it's a new clip in camp. It's, one-handed catch here or him turning a corner around there. And then hearing the players as well. And then the beat reporters on their tweets going, another catch here from JSN, another thing where JSN's doing. And you're just going, geez, have you in your memory, can you remember ever there being a rookie that is getting this much hype?
No, I don't think so. I was actually thinking that same thing earlier this week. I was trying to think in the history of Seattle rookies. Like the Wilson stuff didn't really start until the preseason. It wasn't training camp. It was the preseason that made that pick up steam. Apparently Earl was rough, actually, his first training camp here in Seattle. We've read about that recently. And I was just trying to think of these guys like Cortez and Rick Meyer before my time, but I don't think so. So it's like, yeah, I think so.
And Tez was good. Galloway was a guy that had some heat with him when he was coming along. But like you say with Wilson was rising, and you feel good about him, but you weren't sure. You weren't really sure until you could get him into the preseason games. What you have, this guy from the day one of walking on the football field, from mini camps when he sauced up Devin Witherspoon on that pick play route and ran right past Witherspoon. You're like, oh, okay, just like that, okay. It's everything this consistently to be like this. It's just giving me more and more faith that you mentioned Calvin Johnson. We're not going to go to the Calvin Johnson place, but that this guy is beyond the Amon St. Brown comp that I was running with. And I think the upside by the way he's played and burst on the scene here in this manner has got to raise everybody on their viewpoint of his ceiling. You got to tear that down and then raise it up a little bit, because it's not normal for a player to be doing that. That's my I went a long way around the bend on this one, but that's my bottom line on this. If he's doing what he's doing, and I haven't seen this in recent history, this isn't just empty hype here. This is a player who's going to get on the football field and I think have a good amount of impact year one.
Yeah, I wasn't somebody who loved the pick when we made it, but we've gotten to the point now. I think he outproduces Lockett this year.
Yeah. I'm the same place you were. I had the same outlook. I was fine with the pick. I love the value of the selection. I got it, but you got to adjust to what you're hearing and what you're seeing from guys, not to mention, as I've said too, listen to what other pros talk about him, other receivers talk about this guy, guys like Steve Smith talk about him. They're kind of letting you know this too. When the pros kind of talk about in that manner about these guys with a certain fondness, and sometimes it's not always something specific they can point to. Sometimes it is like with Smith, where he says he's got a doctorate in route running, but it's got me now to a place where I've got to reassess a little bit, Brendon, I think, in the viewpoint of him. And, but I was in the same camp you were in that area.
And obviously we need to see them play some games before we commit to this, but this really should be the best receiver core the Seahawks have ever had. Right, with Metcalf, Lockett, and now JSN. Like, I was looking through Seahawks history, trying to find who the best ones were. Obviously, some of the best ones have been in recent years, like, the Lockett, Metcalf, David Moore group did some damage. Honestly, I really liked last year's group because I thought Goodwin was really good. You reach back into the past. I actually think that the Joey Galloway, Mike Pritchard, James McKnight trio was underrated. And they didn't really have a great quarterback, but that was a really nice trio. Galloway, Pritchard, McKnight. Like, McKnight was everything you could want in a number 3 receiver from everything that I can see when I look back at that. But this should be able to beat pretty much all of them.
Yeah, I can't think of there being any other time. Holmgren years, you'd get 2 of the receivers every year, but you'd always be missing one. So it'd be Darrell Jackson and Bobby Ingram would be going, but then Corn Robinson would be quiet, or Corn would be going and Darrell would be quiet and Bobby be going. So I don't think you've ever had it there where you've had 3 like this. And I call them the Diamond Core. That's my new nickname for them, because I think you do, if Jackson is going to ascend in this manner, to be able to be ready day one and walk right along with the giants of Lockett and DK and not miss a beat and seem like he fits right in, then that's what they are going to be, and probably very close to being, I think, the best in the league. Everybody goes to Cincinnati as the high water mark right now, with their Tyler Boyd as their 3rd. But Boyd didn't even get, I think, 700 yards receiving last year. And right now I'd be penciling in JSN for 850, 800 at least minimum right now as it stands.
Yeah, if he doesn't do that, it'll actually, I think, at this point be a disappointment because the hype train is built up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
The Corin Robinson, Daryl Jackson, Bobby Ingram receiver core should have been the ones though. That was
It's the most talented.
incredibly talented. Yeah.
Corin is, you could make even beyond Joey Galloway, who had the speed, but what Corin Robinson had that Joey didn't, and the reason that Holmgren made him the draft pick is the natural feel of a receiver, natural feel for how to run routes, everything all together with the ability to catch away from the body, to extend and catch. You could really, I think, Brendon, make a strong argument that Corn is the most naturally talented receiver you've ever taken here. And he just couldn't put it together for his varying reasons, but you're on the button with that one 100%. That is your most talented beyond this crew. This crew's probably surpasses him, but that was at the time your most talented three stack, that you had.
The Snail, thank you for the $2. Jamal Adams is going to be an all-pro this year, haters.
Tell him, Snail.
I actually think he'll be pretty good. I don't think he'll play every game, but I think he'll be good when he is out there. And I think that we'll feel a little bit better about things with Jamal after this season. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I could see that for sure happening. I mean, he's had different injuries in different places, so it hasn't exactly been outside of maybe his fingers, the same thing just going on over and over. And, he's due a break here. And I think the team's going to put him in a position to succeed, which is going to help. They're not going to do as much, I think, with Julian Love's presence, having to ask him to play cover high, single high or cover two, which is going to allow him to be a little bit more freed up. And Julian Love's already talked about in some of the interviews, them going to 3 safety looks and being able to move some things around and get a little bit complex with that. Who's coming where, who's covering where, who's in what zone. That definitely could mess up some quarterbacks and offenses and trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think we're supposedly doing a lot of 3-3-5 this year, which would imply, which it does actually imply 3 safeties to a certain extent. Like not every snap, but I think you are going to see some of that, and I think it makes sense. That's the strength of the team right now. You want to feature the strength of your team.
Yeah, and it's also a place to take advantage of where if you've got a guy in Witherspoon and Julian Love and Jamal Adams. All of those guys, are willing tacklers. I think all of those guys can kind of play around in different positions, and you can do different things post snap and coverage where you could show Witherspoon in the slot and then have him drop to a cover 2 responsibility to the far side of the field and then bring in Love down on a blitz on the backside. Like you could mix this stuff through in so many different ways. You could turn Jamal into kind of the floater. They call it the predator role in the Alabama defense where you're just kind of floating around, sort of picking where you find the hole in the particular offense. So I think this frees this up in a way that you couldn't under the old style of defense, which was very much structured and form fitted, and you had to fit within the designs of it. And it was very rigid. This has a lot more flexibility to it. And I hope they lean into it. Like you say, it is the strength, and these guys can do it. It's not you making a guy like Julian Love go, okay, we're going to force you down the slot. We're going to force you to do some free safety stuff. He had you look at his PFF snap counts last year, he was all over and all of that stuff, and he's blitzed in, and he's been in Wink Martindale's scheme. So he knows how to blitz. You play a year under Wink, you know what to do when it comes to blitzing.
Yeah. And I think they played man defense more than any other defense in the league last year. So if you're talking about this defense starting to shift towards more man coverage, you've got Woolen, who I think is better in man than zone. You've got Witherspoon, who is a man corner, and you've got Julian Love. Like you can see where the groceries they're buying are matching the meal that they're trying to supposedly put together.
Jamal on top of that. Jamal's better as a man, way better as a man defender down on running backs and tight ends than he is dropping into zone. Right. And if now you also are able to do that on those moments when you're not blitzing him, to your point. So yeah, you've built it in the right way, I think, with this. I hope they lean into it. I really do, because it would get me as excited about anything this season if they start to get a little more aggressive, a little more complex from a defensive standpoint.
David Pugh, thank you for the $9.99 yet again. David Pugh. All right. Gonna be crazy when a top 5 drafted rookie cornerback wins Defensive Rookie of the Year again this year, except this one doesn't try to undress and assault every receiver on every route. Man gets away with legit crimes every week.
Oh. The Handsy Ramsey, Brendon. The Handsy Ramsey.
I mean, don't discount Witherspoon's ability to get physical with these receivers, by the way. He's going to stick it. You see all the fights he's getting into in camp already. He's not going to back down.
I'm not surprised at all. Anyone watching the tape and how much he talked, and that's what he was as a college corner. So it's going to be the fun part. People are going to like it. They're going to see a lot of the old LOB kind of spirit resonating through this guy on the football field and his mannerisms and just how he goes about his business.
All right. So the the Witherspoon thing, to talk a little bit more about that, because I think that there's some consternation that Witherspoon's going to end up the starting nickel corner, and that's going to limit what he can limit his value.
Right.
And if he ends up in that role, that means it was a bad pick, because he's not going to be able to do enough. So I want to talk about this a little bit. First of all, I believe last year the average NFL defense was in nickel 70% of the time. So you're still on the field most of the time if you're a nickel cornerback, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the exact numbers are, I looked this up, so I know the exact numbers from last season. Your outside guys are 93%, your slot 71% in total.
Right. So if you are a slot corner, you're getting on the field way more often than you're not. And also think about how important the nickel corner is becoming in the modern NFL, because you have all these great slot receivers. You know, JSN is not the only one out there. You've got guys like Cooper Kupp, who is a year removed from probably the greatest season any receiver has ever had in the history of the NFL. He does a lot of stuff from the slot. Like you said, Justin Jefferson does a lot of stuff from the slot. In general, you're seeing a lot of things happen from the slot. And also, by the way, nickel corners do a lot in run defense as well, because they're relatively close to where the ball is before the snap, and they get involved on running plays pretty often. So there's a lot to be said about playing nickel in the modern NFL.
There really is. This is one that takes a little bit for me to unpack, Brendon, because I have heard so much about it. And I think that I can understand where you originally might have a little bit of pullback when you hear the news that he gets moved to slot. But then I think you got to just look deeper and deeper into it. We're talking about a 22% difference in the amount of total defensive snaps played on the Seahawks field last year between the slot corner and the outside corners. So you're talking, you get up and angry about this. It's about 22% of the snaps, number one, which is kind of strange to get up into that and have that specifically be something that hankers people. Number two, let's come to places of agreement on this, Brendon, as far as those people that might disagree in this stance. You know, is it possible that Michael Jackson's improved this offseason? We don't know for sure it's not or it happened. I'm not telling people you have to accept that he's improved, but is it possible? I think everyone would agree that it could be possible that he's taking steps forward in his game and getting even better than last year when he wasn't bad. And so I'm not saying he's going to star status, but is he getting better? Could he be improving? Yes. And the good news on this will be proven out, because if he hasn't been getting better, if he is just what he was last year, we'll call it on that. But if the coaching staff is seeing this on the field, an improved Mike Jackson, do they want to take an improved Mike Jackson and take him off the field to take a rookie Witherspoon, who's not going to be as good in his rookie year as he will be 3 years down the line playing on the outside, and who also himself said on when he was drafted that the thing he needs to work on is his zone coverage. So you're also putting him in more zone opportunity moments versus what you will be putting him in the slot, which is more of a man-based style coverage. You're not playing as much zone down there. So to me, that's what we come down the question on. Except a little bit as a fan that might withdraw from this a little bit, that maybe if Mike Jackson's better, and I've tried to get this down to the simplest place of saying, okay, think of it like this. Witherspoon plays outside corner this year, and he's a 85 on your matting rating. Michael Jackson goes out there and he can play 87 this year. Now, if you put Witherspoon into the slot, he plays for you at an 87, 88 versus Kobe Bryant, who plays for you an 82. Which is better, A or B in that scenario? What's better for the football team in 2023? What's better for the defense in 2023, A or B? And to me, it's a real easy decision to go to B at that point and say, I want the strongest unit out on the football field. You know, Brendon, it's like Julian Love said on an interview the other day with 710. You want to get all of your best players on the field at one given time. You don't want to just put guys into a place. Get your best out there and roll. So I'm really not torn up as much as others are. I struggle to understand it. You can't look away from the fact they played that amount of snaps last year with the 71% slot snaps played overall on the defense last year. That's a lot of snaps. He's going to get a lot of run. The one point you just made, I want to touch on finally with this, which is that the run defense. You and I have been thinking that not you and I, but definitely me in a lot of respects, is thinking that the way to fix this run defense has got to come from getting better defensive linemen, and that we've got to improve that front. You know, but maybe what we're going to see from this is, in actuality, it's the back end that's going to really help to improve this run defense as much as anything else. Because in Julian Love, you got a top 25 tackler on the year last year. That's a very big part of what he does. Devin Witherspoon's a good tackler. Mike Jackson on the outside is a good tackler. Jamal Adams coming down now is a good tackler. Bobby Wagner is going to be a better tackler than either of the two guys you added last year. You've added plus tacklers away from the defensive line, and maybe that will be the step to improving this defense.
Right, right. I mean, it's all about that idea of finding creative ways to solve solutions that it's sometimes hard to really grasp as it's happening, but you look back on it and you realize, like last year, this defense really bad against the run, but one of the main reasons why, more so, maybe just as much as the fact that the defensive line played poorly, was the tackling. Was that we had Cody Barton out there, who is not a very good tackler. That I don't think Jordan Brooks is a great tackler. I think he's better than Barton, but this year you're going to Bobby Wagner. This year, instead of having Josh Jones out there who can't tackle at all for part of the season, you've got a guy like Witherspoon out there maybe instead. And you had Tease Tabor out there for a little bit at the end of the year. Who's that guy? Like, you have to look at things from various perspectives when you're trying to solve a problem, I think. I do think the defensive line will probably be an issue this year. It's not going to be as good as we want it to be, but I do think the actual problem will be at least partially resolved by the things done this offseason.
Agreed. And your tackling point is one that I think can't be undersold enough, because if you go and you look at the teams last year that were the best tackling teams that had the lowest missed tackle rate, those top 10 teams were all very good defenses. Niners, Eagles, Denver Broncos. It was a who's who of the good defenses in the good to great defenses in the NFL. You've got to be able to tackle well. And we were something like 17th last year, but I think you could make a very strong argument if Witherspoon comes in and plays the slot that you're potentially now, depending on the personnel package you go to, nickel or base or dime, you could have improved the tackling at 4 or 5 different positions across the board, and that should help to then improve the defense as a whole.
And also, I also think that there is something to be said for the possibility that you could have Witherspoon at the slot in nickel downs, and then you slide him outside in base. Like that can still happen. Sure. I think that happens to many corners across the league. Like Byron Murphy last year for the Cardinals, I believe, was a guy who would play nickel and then slide to the outside in base. So if that happens, Witherspoon's basically on the field every snap. And I would argue if he's doing that, he's actually got more on his plate than he does if he's just an outside corner.
Agreed. Agreed. And it's really, if he's at that point where he's at the same amount of snaps, then what are we really talking about? Like, well, he could be shutting down a grade A receiver on the outside, but we can go through just as many names now on the slot, especially the names of players that we're going to have to play this upcoming season. You'll play a Cowboys team that's going to have a lot of CD Lamb in the slot. You're going to play the Rams, who are potentially going to have Cooper Kupp 2 games. You're going to have to go down the list, and there's some line of slots that you're going to have to deal with that you're going to need him out there. And that's going to be one of the main focal points from a defensive standpoint to stopping those offenses that you're going to concentrate on. And so put it in, shut down the most important player. If I go against Detroit, I don't want Amon Brown beat me. I go against the Rams this year, Brendon, with that team that's trotting out 59 rookies, when you include their practice squad. I don't want Cooper Kupp to be beating me. Mm-hmm. And so this is definitely, to me, a step in the direction of finding a way to solve that, not just running when we run out what we run out, or starters on our outside. It's like, how do I take away what you want to do best offensively? And this is something that has been missing at times from our defense. When you look at the last 6-7 years, we just kind of go out and play it. We just line up and do it. And this is where I think they're taking steps to correct that and be a little more forward thinking in their approach, being a little more, we got to be a little bit more in depth, deeper than this. This isn't a pop song. We need to go with something more, underground, and you know what I mean? It's like you get need a little bit more edge to this than that.
Yeah. I by the way, that's actually what I think will happen. Witherspoon plays nickel in nickel downs and then slides outside. That way you get Jackson on the field a pretty decent amount, because Jackson apparently has had a really good camp. Going to be hard to keep that guy off the field, but you're getting your 2 most talented guys out there as much as possible with Woolen and Witherspoon. I think that's probably that's the way I hope it goes, at least.
I agree. And I think that you have an opportunity to really run that man thing is I think a big driver here with this is that they know Woolen's going to take some time to get comfortable in zone, and you're buying him a bit of that time to get him comfortable there while you're having him operate from the slot, where even when you're running a cover 3, for instance, you go to a 3 wide receiver set, you got cover 3 with the safety dropping deep and your corners dropping deep. That slot, more often than not, is going to be in a man-based situation where he's just trying to stay sticky, which is just easier for a rookie to come in and just stay tight on him. Just stay up on that guy. Don't worry about your zone and flood zone concepts. And if carrying this man and releasing this guy and picking this guy back up, we're going to keep it nice and easy and simple for you in your first year to let you kind of play. And you'll eventually grow into understanding that other aspect of the game.
Let's see here. Nolan R. Vance, thank you for the $5. I will not stand for this Branch, Burleson, Ingram, and Obomanu slander. Nice to see you together again. Burleson was a cool dude. I'll say that. I like him.
Burleson was a good dude. I feel like all those guys were really talented. Ingram was right at the end there. Burleson, it felt like, was kind of in and out of the lineup. And did Branch really ever have a year of production for us? I mean,
he had at least one. He had at least one productive year. It wasn't anything over the top, but it was pretty good. Obomanu was. I don't think he ever really had a big year with us. He was just kind of a guy.
He's all I remember. You're right about Obama. That was the one that Clayton could never say. Obomanu. That he had that Saints game where he went off. Remember that? Yeah. He had in the Beastquake game. He had himself a game
right.
in that one.
Yeah, I remember John Carlson in that game. I remember Brandon Stokely in that game. I think I remember Mike Williams in that game.
Yeah.
Obomanu, not so much, but I believe you.
That might have been Hasselbeck's best game as a Hawk. I mean, he was just dropping dimes all over the field.
Yeah, it was the last game he ever played as a Seahawk. It was like the guy in Caddyshack having the golf game of his life right before he gets hit by lightning.
It was so true. It was unbelievable. Some of the throws you watch Matt make in that game. You're just like, holy hell, man.
The Snail, thank you for telling me that StreamYard finally updated, so member messages actually show up in the chat now, because I don't think that's ever happened before. The Prez getting 10 sacks this year.
Let's go.
I could go for that. I could get behind that. That would be an indication that he's being utilized properly, at least, right?
They're more better situated to run Prez in a pressure-based fashion than they were when he came on in 2020 to set the record at 9, to your point, because now he's operating in more of the jet scheme, more in a 3-4 defense, more in a defense that's built to allow for the safety to blitz. Whereas when Jamal set the record, basically what Seattle was doing, Brendon, was bringing down Jamal as the 5th defender in the box. And so if you have an offensive line that's already got 5 natural blockers going against 4, you bring down Jamal as the 5th. All they've got to do is then just slide the protection to Jamal, and they've got a body for a body. And if you don't have a dynamic guy inside to win one-on-one on that slide, which they didn't at the time, he's neutralized. In this way, in this manner, you can send him from everywhere. And the thing I come back to over and over with this a little bit in this point is, if you look back to where he got injured last year, coming on a delayed blitz, was he coming on that blitz from the edge? No. It was a delayed blitz from the inside on Russell Wilson. And that leads me to believe that they were starting to acknowledge that last year in the change over the scheme. As you and I have often thought, a lot got probably thrown out of that playbook with Jamal's injury going down. But now it returns back into the playbook, hopefully this year, when he does return. And that's possible. That's possible. You can get him that if they're willing to do it. And having Bobby and Jamal as a combination where you have 2 of the best blitzers at their position, bar none, in the league. If you are not working to take advantage of that, you are insane as a defensive coordinator.
Absolutely. Eric Tams, thank you once again for the $10. To Brandon's point, I'd love to see a breakdown for next year's schedule about how many team yards the teams will face channel into the slot versus the outside. I mean, that would be kind of hard to do because some receivers move around and play in the outside and inside. But I imagine somewhere out there, somebody's come up with some way to do it, like PFF or
maybe
Sharp Football Stats.
They should. I agree, Eric. There definitely should be a stat out there, but it would be hard to chart. You can see with PFF, I think they do on the advanced breakdowns, they do show you, I might be able to find that on PFF actually, to do that kind of breakdown, because they get down to some pretty far slots, but I can't remember if they get down to where your position is, or it's just, this is your many targets, this is your many, routes run and running to go try to catch the ball, as opposed to a running play. So I'll try to see if I can find that kind of data, but you're right. It would be interesting. And I think just my gut would say that over the last few years, this is slanted more and more towards these slots and their utilization just going up more and more and more and more versus where it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah. When I was doing my research into the 70s and 80s Seahawks receiver cores, there were some years, there was 1 year where our third wide receiver on the team had 4 catches all season.
Yeah, that's why they called him Ground Knox, man. He
Yeah.
didn't get that nickname for nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
he was Brendon. He was the epitome. I mean, if you looked up in the dictionary of run pass, you would have seen Chuck Knox's picture, and it was not. It was like it was a meme in the '80s before there were memes among Seahawks fans, and just that it wasn't just that that's what he did. That's what he did. Run, pass, punt, run, pass, punt. It was, you weren't getting anything. He was not leaving or deviating, but that left you with like 290 attempts on a season as far as your
There
quarterback
were a
goes.
couple years where we had a prolific three-headed receiver room. 79, Largent, McCullum, and Rabel was actually pretty decent for that era.
Mm-hmm.
Rabel was actually a quality number 3 receiver for that era. It's easy to forget now because the numbers aren't there, but for the era they are.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, power of the mustache, man. So, they were decently, but those were fun teams back then because they were kind of plucky, and it was hard if you're an expansion back then. You didn't get super shot like some of these expansion franchises and other sports that get, like NBA would get handed these guys that they get as kind of to like be functional. So they had to kind of, find their way in those games.
Yeah, and in 84, of course, Daryl Turner, who has like 800 touchdowns on 3 career catches or something weird like that, is just the most weird statistical anomaly career ever. And Paul Johns was actually pretty legit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Burner Turner, Daryl Burner Turner. He had a great nickname too. But that was Largent took the double team, and then Turner had the single coverage, and you weren't going to worry about Turner because you were worried about Largent at the time. I think 84, if I'm not mistaken, was the Warner dead leg year where he was done. He was done after week 1, so you just had to throw the ball all over the football field 24/7 because you had hitched everything to Warner being healthy that year. That was when you really had a bell cow back. They were bell cows.
One of the running backs we had to try to replace Kurt Warner that year actually was my gym teacher when I was very young, Randall Morris.
Okay.
Yeah. Didn't, he wasn't the starter or anything, but he was part of that running back by committee.
Yeah. No, we worked in a bunch of different guys that year, including a doctor. We called on everybody, I think, that season to try to fill in for, but what was fun about that was the 1 year you had with Chuck where he let it rip every other year, but he couldn't lean to his running game. So you kind of had to let him, let Craig cook and let it go. And, it was a fun year. That was a fun year for the Hawks because of that.
Pretentious Cameron, thank you for the member message. Any chance the Rams surprise like we did last year? I mean, you look at that roster, and I don't know how it happens. Like, they made no real effort to get better this offseason either. They are just like completely in take it on the chin for 1 year mode to me.
My theory on this, Brendon, is that football teams don't go into tank mode or tank for the number 1 pick very often. In this sport, they're way ahead of that curve than other sports like basketball, where it's really bad. But I really do feel like the Rams are hardlining themselves for that number 1 pick. And I think the Cardinals are kind of softly doing it. The Rams are doing it kind of aggro style. The Rams are doing it as an alt, right? Like, well, I mean, if we have the number 1 pick, we won't have a great roster, but if we just, and if there's a Kyler Murray trade, midseason comes up, and so I feel this is my impression on it. Maybe I'm underselling the Rams, but there's been rumors of them even trying to get Stafford out of there. There's rumors of maybe they'd be willing to listen on Donald. I think they're going to lean into this rebuild. And a guy like McVay has flirted a couple different times with already retiring, with every, going, I don't know if I want to do this long term. And maybe the way that he sold himself on staying there in the long term and going through a rebuild is that he's going to get his marquee quarterback. And maybe they don't see a big difference between whether that's May or Caleb Williams from their standpoint. That would, give him a good young, not that he's had a good quarterback with Stafford, but he's at the end of his road, and he's not anywhere near what he was in his prime. So maybe they start to make a little bit, and they're turning this over so hard, Brendon. What I like about what they've done, they're not softening this, they're not trying to like spread this out over a couple of years. They took all of the hit and all of the brunt, and everybody out that's Allen Robinson done, Leonard Floyd done. We're not going to just slow play this. But I think by also doing that, Brendon, I mean, how can they be competitive at that point? Yeah, you have still Donald, or yeah, you have Stafford, you have Donald, yeah, you have Cooper Kupp, but that's about it. Tyler Higbee, I guess, Havenstein, but that's about it. And the one difference between them, to the question that was asked there, Brendon, and us last year, is that part of why we took the steps we did last year to be better than people thought we should have been was that we had a draft class to lean on to help us get us there. Mm-hmm. Rams don't have a draft class to lean on to help them get them here. Yeah, they had some picks, but they were still down all of those selections from all of what they had done to where they couldn't make that same kind of impact, including being down their number 1 overall pick.
Right. I mean, here's a question. Who is the second best player on the Rams defense?
There's no right answer, Brendon, on that.
Yeah, I looked at their depth chart last night. I still don't know. It might be the pass rusher from Alabama they took a couple years ago. It might be.
Is Lewis still on the? Is he still on the roster?
I think he is. Terrell Lewis, I think is his name.
They cut him at one point.
I think he's still there. Kobe Turner, the guy who picked sixth Brett Ripien in the Broncos game last year, is still there. Maybe it's him. A'Shawn Robinson gone, Greg Gaines gone, Taylor Rapp gone, Leonard Floyd gone, Bobby Wagner gone, Jalen Ramsey gone, and they didn't do anything to replace them. They basically slept through free agency. They were just like, okay, we're going to be bad this year, but whatever.
That's why I come back to, I think they're leaning into this, and they're telling you that they're leaning into us, because if they wanted to still try to sub-compete or see if they could catch fire with the old guys one more time, then you don't go whole hog on the trade and cut. You would hold on to a Ramsey. You would restructure and say, let's give this the one more run. This has been the ultimate team in telling you when they're going to go run, because they will sacrifice damn their torpedoes. We're going for everything to get this at that point. They've shown you this before. So when they go the opposite direction to me, it's telling me they're going the opposite direction from a philosophy standpoint, and recognizing, as I think is smart on their part. We went for it. We pushed all the chips into the center of the table. We got our ring. Now let's recognize we got our ring, and we got to turn this over to get back into a spot where we can compete to get back there again. And if we make that decision like our Hawks made last year, Brendon, you can turn it around that much faster. It's when you belabor it and, like I said, you soft play it a little bit of we can't go really, really bad. I mean, the fans won't like that. We can't go bad. We got to go kind of bad. No, go all the way in. Clear the dead money. Last year with us, $57 million off the books. Get it off. Clear it all. Now we turn over and we're all fresh.
Yeah, you don't want to do what the Angels did, trying to go all in around Ohtani for a run that's never going to work, and then lose him, and then have the worst farm system in all of Major League Baseball with a terrible team on top of it.
So stupid on their part. It's absolutely one of the big drop the ball moments of an organization in doing that, because I don't see any way he signs back with them into the future. For what you just said, there's not really a lot of hope for that unless he's planning on carrying the team on his back for years to come. And so you could have gone out there and gotten some insane haul to help you turn this through. But instead you're kind of like the petulant child, where you don't get to have the toy you want. So you're just going to sit in the corner and pout. And they'll be paying the price for it in future years, I think.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's good for the Mariners. Maybe we just didn't, and that way we can get Ohtani without having to actually trade for him at this point. Because I don't know if you're watching him on the All-Star break, but it was like when they asked him, and he's just got this wry smile on his face. And what do you think about coming to Seattle? He's kind of did you see that cut?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, when I do that, it's did you eat the last slice of cake? That ain't a no.
Yeah, at the very least, if he doesn't come here, he'll get out of the American League, right? Because it's us, Dodgers, or Giants, right?
Well, my whole theory on this has been that he's not going to want to go to East Coast and do that double flight to get to Japan. That if you have a Japanese player that does want to go home time to time, I know there's been a couple that have gone out to New York and done this, but I don't think I don't think rule of thumb for guys wanting to travel that much. That's a long flight to get back home if you're going all the way across the country having to do the two jumpers. So yeah, I think it's probably a West Coast team one way or another, and he's at least he's out of the division minimum. But the Mariners, my opinion is on this. It's a Mariner thing with us, Brendon. My big thing with this now is that this Mariner franchise, especially with being as kind of dead as they were at the trade deadline and not being aggressive, almost as a goodwill gesture to the fan base this offseason, whether you sign Ohtani or not, you need to be the team on record as to have given him the largest contractual offer of anybody out there on the open market. I think that is, you've been the most profitable team in baseball last year. You're going to be the most profitable team in the baseball this year. If you were to add Ohtani, you would not stop being the most profitable team in baseball, I would imagine, because that's not going to hurt ticket sales. So do a goodwill gesture at this point. You've given these fans 20 years of basically bad baseball, absent one playoff year, one playoff run. Do something now to take some steps forward to really show everybody it doesn't cost you prospects. It doesn't hurt your farm system. You have all your cheap young arms still that you have coming up. So that would be my thing. I'm not like DePoto's got to be fired after all this or anything like that. I just say, okay, now you go make your run. And if he says no, Brendon, fine. If he says no, I want to go to the Dodgers, no, I want to go then fine. I don't want to go on Ichiro's thing, fine. But at least you're on record to your fans as saying we made the strongest run out of anybody else.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm interested because I don't know if you've seen or not, but earlier today it was announced the season ticket packages for next year went way up. Like from 2 years ago, the price is up like 60% for those packages. So go put the money to good use.
It's the part that's frustrating the hell out of me because these Seattle fans right now are showing this Mariners organization. They're showing baseball fans throughout the country. They're how it is to be a loyal fan, how it is to fill up that stadium, regardless of what's going on. Every time I turn on and watch the TV, the Mariner game, I'm watching them out there filling that place up, doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing their part. They're not bailing on you. They're not being fair weather fans. They're not being bandwagon jumpers. They're going out and they're putting their hard-earned money to get in that stadium and watch those games. You've got to do something to the other side as ownership. Otherwise, this narrative of ownership only being about money, only turning a profit margin, only looking to make the team good enough so they're just entertaining enough so they can continue to pack the house will only start to set further in, will only start to deepen as a narrative. And it's not a good one for the franchise because eventually it will eventually cause the attendance to dip and fall away.
This is an opportunity here because, attendance is up significantly from last year. I've seen the numbers significantly up, despite the team being a little bit worse. So you've got this margin between your profitability and the amount of money it costs to actually field this team. So you got to take advantage of that.
You really do, man. And it's right now is the right time to do this. And this is the right player to do this on. And this is the right kind of signing to kind of set this thing forward. So, all the signs are here to do this, but we'll see if they really are. We'll see if they're willing to make that jump out there. But if they don't, I think it's only going to push this narrative in further that they don't really care about winning or that's not the number one priority. And if it's not the number one priority, it's because that's why people are showing up right now, Brendon. They think this is a team on the rise. They think this is a young team coming together. They think that this stock's good. So they're thinking there's a reason to invest into this and go through these bumps and ups and downs. But if they just are to understand this is the state we'll always kind of be in. And by the way we build our team, then that will shift.
Okay, let's see here. Kevin Mullen, thank you for the $1.99. Too premature for end of year defensive and offensive rankings. Much love. I actually did a video where I threw out some predictions for rankings last week, I think. So it's not premature at all.
No, I think on paper they're a top 5 offense. I think they're a top 15 defense, and I think they're a top 3 special teams unit. That would be my about right where I would land on across the board, and that'd be just overall between yards given up and points allowed or points scored, and yardage gains. So it'd be kind of just a cumulative number, but I feel pretty good that they'll be in those markers.
Yeah, I believe I had offense 4th in points. I had defense, I think 19th in points. Because the thing to remember is if you're scoring a lot of points, other teams are going to score a little bit more because they're trying to keep up.
Agreed.
Like, the greatest example ever being the 2011 Packers that were first in offense and last in defense. Like, yeah, maybe that defense was bad. They weren't the worst in the league, though. They just looked like it because the offense scored so much.
2020 with us through the first 8 games, same way. That defense wasn't good, but it was also partly because you were making offenses feel like they had to score every time, and so they weren't trying to run. Like, we were bad that year in run defense, but it didn't matter because teams weren't going to run against us because they were so good at throwing against us. Right. Like, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. Benson DeWalt, thank you for the $4.99. Bengals Seahawks Super Bowl. I'm a soothsayer. Trust me.
Sounds good to me.
Mm-hmm.
Sign me up.
Yeah. I can go for that. I would be pretty happy about that. That way, even if we lost, it wouldn't be a team that we hate winning the Super Bowl. I don't think any Seahawks fan hates the Bengals. That would be kind of random. It's a team that hasn't won a Super Bowl before. It's a team that I think would be a fun matchup. Their receivers against our secondary, strength on strength. Mm-hmm. And I think I could dig it.
Yeah, Tariq Woolen on Jamar Chase. I would love that as a Super Bowl matchup. Seahawks, Bengals, Seahawks, Bills. Those would be two, to me, really fun matchups.
We got a member message from Rye Guy. Thank you, member, for 33 months. Thoughts on the Ducks and Huskies joining the Big Ten? So yeah, there's been a lot of college football stuff. I don't know how closely you've been following it. I'm kind of sick of it. I'm kind of over it. I'm ready for my team to just play college football against somebody. I'm super over this whole Pac-12 garbage.
I think stuff started already as a process with this a couple of years ago of everything being disassembled as far as the old traditions in this way. And, quite honestly, when they kind of went to I love the playoff system, but like the Rose Bowl no longer being between the Big Ten and the Pac-10, that started to kind of, for me, and it just pull it away from, not that it didn't make it still worth watching those teams or checking out college football, but it removed a certain ambiance to it that you had of the traditions of the sport that went back in some cases almost 100 years. And so that's continued now with the teams leaving this conference, adding this conference, moving over here, moving over there. It's so hard to track. And like you, I just become exhausted by it and just say, let's just get to where we get to on it and have them play the games. And, that's where you lean into the winning the conference thing. To me, the whole thing with it back in the day, Brendon, was you won the conference, you went to the Rose Bowl. There was this thing that it held to. I know the playoff thing has been good for college football, and it's probably for the best on it, but there is, and I'm an old head with this, but there was something a little bit lost, when it was just, like when you beat Michigan and went to the Rose Bowl back in the day, it was like, or you went to play Michigan in the Rose Bowl and beat them. It was just, there was something different about it. To now, if you win, I don't know why. It just feels different. So it's now you move these teams around, it feels even more different. Your pathway to get to winning a conference is who we got to beat, Utah, is it, we're not a BYU though, right? They're not yet. Next year, no, just get to the games. But it's inevitable. Those teams leaving. Understandable they are. Everything's going SEC, Big Ten, basically. We're going to have two conferences at this point with the way it's going. Oh, you're muted, buddy.
Oh, I am sorry about that. Brendon M., thank you for the member message. Hawks sweeping the Niners this year, calling it. I could go for that.
Got some bold predictions in the chat. I'm loving the energy. Let's go.
If you've been following Niners camp, it's kind of weird, right? They're giving equal snaps to 4 different quarterbacks. It's pretty out there and probably not good. It's not what I would do. I know that.
We keep going. They keep adding quarterbacks, and then we've got a fourth. Like we've talked about, the old saying is the old Bill Parcells quote is, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. So if I've got 4 quarterbacks, then how many by Bill Parcells math do I have, Brendon? Is it a -2 at that point? Do we become a negative integer when it gets to that spot of 4 quarterbacks?
Yeah, and I guess I kind of get it that none of them look all that good. I've been following it a little bit. It's not good. But that being said, like, why is Brandon Allen getting snaps? He should not get any snaps. You should be spending all the time you have on Darnold, Lance, and Purdy if you're going to be looking at 3 guys at all. And honestly, given the fact that Purdy can't possibly be physically all the way back, I'd almost kind of clear him out of there.
I would too, but they're trying to put him up as, what you hear from their camps is he's sort of the de facto starter as it's in place. Like whether his arm was ready or not, he was going to be put in that number 1 role. To me, it seems like, I think what you're hinting at here is it seems a little bit not like it's a nice organic thing of a way you want this to play out. It's a little bit slipshod, and it seems like they don't really have a cogent plan on what they're trying to do here or how they want to go about this. All those quarterbacks play differently too, which is part of this. Like Purdy's going to play different than Lance, and Lance is going to play different than Darnold. And I don't even know enough about Allen to know where he's at, but it doesn't make any sense at this point that you're running 4, Brendon. It's also, this is the place the Niners, to me, they've got a couple of spots that are their landmines. They should be a good team. I certainly would put them on paper saying they should get 12 to 13 wins this season. But if you were to tell me that this is a team that starts to take a step back and you say, okay, this is a team now in year 6, I got to let my dog out real quick. 1 second here.
No problem.
If you tell me in, a Niner team that's now, as I was talking to a Niner channel like last week on this, Brendon, that's in year 5, year 6 of a run, they're not in just a year 1, 2 on this. And when you get to this year 4, 5, 6 state of things, they're in the place of like where we were, where you're not a young team anymore. You've played a lot of playoff games. You've got guys that are now starting to gain age. They're still guys in their late 20s. They're not guys that are old, but they are guys that are now going to fall to a little bit more of a susceptibility of injury. And how long did our Legion of Boom run last? Like 2012 to 16, 4 or 5 years.
Basically, yeah.
That's what you get in the NFL. So if you tell me this year, when they're about due for that, you look at that secondary where there's some issues there in the secondary. Tre'Davious Ward, who is right behind Sauce Gardner in the hold department, not a guy that I've got a lot of faith in, but that's the one part they've got in the second. The rest of it's kind of got some question marks. The offensive line with McGlinchey going down, and you look at Trent Williams at 35 years old, and how many guys at 35 years plus of age have played the left tackle and played it well in this sport in recent history, no matter how good he is. And then the quarterback finally. 4 quarterbacks deep that you don't know what they're going to do. It may be week to week. We might get 4 different ones every week. Maybe they play them once a quarter, Brendon. We'll get a new one every chance. It'll be so brilliant. I'll play one every different quarter.
Yeah, they got a real problem on that offensive line. I think their right tackle is Colton McKivitz. And their whole interior, I don't think was that good last year even. So they didn't really do anything to address it. So they got problems up there. I'm sure they're going to find a way to be good, but they may not be dominant.
Yeah, it still is a team that's got a lot of power on paper. It does, but those holes that are there have not been there in recent years when you look at them. And it can easily, one of those two things going wrong, say nothing of Brendon, those things that exist. And then on top of it, what happens if a guy like Deebo Samuel or Christian McCaffrey go down to an injury, 2 guys that have had a pretty lengthy injury list throughout their career, history wise, coming into the season. And,
right.
I think it's definitely, they're vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Derpy Squid, thank you for the $5. Say the Hawks have a top 5 to 6 offense this year. I think they will. Do you see Waldron getting a head coach job? It depends on how many openings there are.
I was talking about this. Yeah, I was talking about this last night. Here's my opening list, Brendon. Let's see what you think. Because I don't think it's going to be a big opening list like we've had in recent years, but I do think that this is what the opening list will look like. Raiders.
If they can afford to.
I mean, why couldn't they afford to? Well, you're right. They never have money.
Supposedly, they wanted to fire him last year, but they can't because they are cash strapped and already guaranteed his contract.
Oh, they're paying Gruden too still, probably.
Yeah.
Probably still paying Gruden.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think they're going to be the worst team in that division. It's going to be probably hard not to pull the trigger. I think Washington is another team that I think is likely to go at it there. I think New Orleans, if they underperform there with Dennis Allen, is a team that's going to look to move on there. I was thinking that that's just about it outside of maybe New England with Bill Belichick, because that's another team that could go out and have a year that's down. But I think that that's about it when I came down to it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Todd Bowles.
Well, Bowles is, I think, going to get a bit of a pass this year because they're sitting on $25 million of dead money off Brady. And they're having to, they got guys returning off injury. They lost 2 of their best offensive linemen last year. I mean, I think he gets a little bit more, maybe. I mean, you're right. It's possible because he was kind of put into the job, not because he was the best candidate, but because they were just trying to get anybody but Bruce Arians so they get Tom Brady to come back to the team. And so he was already on the staff, just elevate from within, so to speak. That's possible with it, but I think he might have a little bit of an out with saying, we didn't have the money to spend to go, get a quarterback. You had me with Baker Mayfield. You're going to fire me because I couldn't make Baker Mayfield work. That's a tough slant on a coach, but there won't be a lot. I think he will be a guy considered. Yes. That's if you're a coach that puts back-to-back seasons like Waldron would have put back from a production standpoint, especially having done with Geno Smith, especially having done it with a young roster like he has. That absolutely will get you a job usually offered.
I feel like Ben Johnson's going to be ahead of him, the Lions offensive coordinator. So that's one. I think he's definitely getting a head coaching job next year. The Niners are probably going to have like 18 assistant coaches become head coaches like they do every offseason.
Pick up 7 compensatory picks.
Yeah. So there's not going to be a ton of opportunities for him, but there really aren't a ton of candidates that would be better than him. Is there like some really intriguing veteran head coach guy that like the Cowher types that might come out if somebody throws enough money at him?
I mean, it's kind of those guys have kind of pastured out. Like the potential guys of going back and doubling back to a Tony Dungy or, back to those, they've kind of, the NFL's kind of turned through all those guys. There's not an old guy you can go back to that I think is just sitting there that, would be a hot climate. Peyton's back into the market. He's not that guy you could have sit there and looked at in that way. The guy that went to Jacksonville, the former Super Bowl winner with the Eagles, like whose name I can never remember. He's back out. So there's really not, which is why I do think that there's a good chance if he does that he will be probably gone at that point because he will get the offer because there isn't a lot of guys. I don't see who.
Oh, the Chargers. They could be another opening this offseason.
They're possible. I think they're going to take off this year, though, because of the fact that I think finally that defensive coordinator is going to have his personnel on right if they're not injured like they were last year. And then finally as well, I think, too, they got an offensive coordinator in the house and that guy from the Boise State kid.
Kellen Moore.
Kellen Moore. I think Kellen Moore with Justin Herbert's just like, that's a perfect pairing to me.
David Pugh, thank you for the $9.99. Benson, now if I don't see a Bengals Seahawks Super Bowl this year, then I punish you to watching only Hall of Fame games for the rest of eternity. Hope you're right, Benson. Go Hawks. I want it. I need it.
He said he's a soothsayer, man. You don't see a lot of folks fake selling themselves to the soothsayers. I don't know how many soothsayers I've met that aren't the real deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we're all caught up on donos. So we talked about most of the fun stuff from training camp, JSN, Witherspoon. We mentioned Trey Brown apparently looking good, Mike Jackson looking good. A couple of other things I just want to highlight here. So Carroll said earlier today that the most improved player this year is Boye Mafe, which I think is a massive deal because without Mafe taking a big step up, I think our edge room would have been it would have been a weird situation where you don't really know what you're going to do with the other spot outs alongside Nwosu. So now you're in a situation where Mafe can be a starter and then you can have Taylor specifically relegated to passing downs, which is the right way to go about things.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I've got the finishing touches I'm putting on right now on a Boye Mafe video for my channel. So I've been going back through the all 22 stuff and looking back at his play and he was a tale of two players last year. But what's interesting about this is that he did find a role and he was a force as a run defender. It wasn't merely that he was like okay as a defender or just kind of held up better than Darrell Taylor did. It was that he was very close to being kind of impactful in that first year as a run defender. And I think his upside is actually as one of the more elite edge run defenders in this league, no matter what he does as a pass rusher. Jess, that is the first and foremost thing he's providing and bringing to you. And, you got to go back on this guy and remember when we think about him, Brendon, new to football in college, in high school, wasn't a guy that played for a lot of different years. So he was going to be a bit raw. He was a guy that improved every single season at Minnesota. He gained 50 pounds of weight during his time there at Minnesota, adding onto that frame. And when he tested, you run through the compilation on the relative athletic score on this, he was a 99 percentile guy before you factor in his 3-cone and short shuttle, still a 95 percentile athlete after you put that in for a guy for his size. So he's got some special markers there. The pass rush is the question because last year he didn't have anything to go to on the pass rush. He has this hand swipe move. It's the Bosa hand swipe where you go to the edge and you hand swipe off and then you bounce and sort of create extra step off the swipe. And then you have a straight line to the quarterback. And he would just go to it as I'm watching the all-22, Brendon. He's just going to it constantly. And the tackles are figuring it out, right? They realize early on that's all he's kind of got. And so they're shutting it down. So he had to develop this, but it's not a big bad thing that it isn't because I went back and looked and Brendon, if you go back to 2017 and you look at rookie edge rushers in the second round taken, not one guy's gotten beyond 4 sacks in their rookie year. There's not been a rookie edge rusher taken in the second round that has had really great pass rushing impact in their first year over that time period, which I think is kind of notable, including 3 guys that were taken in last year's second round. So him only getting 3 sacks last year should not be a death knell for those folks thinking the pass rush can't develop or become more of a part of his game, especially considering the athleticism and how special of an athlete, how new he is to football, the fact that he's improved throughout his time as a player. And then there was a cut up I was watching the other day from practice, and it's Bob Condotta actually put it up on his Twitter, where the big thing that stood out with Boye is he's trying to get to the edge. I'll beat you to the edge. I'll beat you to the edge. Okay, if I can't beat you to the edge, then I'm going to hand swipe you. I got nothing as a counter inside. But then you're seeing on this cut up from the tape, he does a swim move counter to the inside, violent, twitchy, explosive, where he starts outside, has the tackle over, setting outside, and then he's right back inside on the counter. So he's been working on it. You never saw that move on any of his all-22 tape on any pass rush rep last year. There was never even an attempt to go to that swim move like that. And so if he can get that inside move, he will become deadly as a pass rusher. Not the best in the league, but he'll be every bit the kind of pass rusher you get in Uchenna Nwosu if he can get that inside counter move acclimated into his game, because he's got the hustle, he's got the quickness, he's got the bend, he's got the strength, he's got the size. There's no limitations there. It's just that, becoming more like a technician there with those hands, having more of a plan of attack, having a counter move.
Yeah, and it's exciting to watch because Mafe was a guy I fell in love with way before we drafted him. He was a guy I had my eye on for months before we took him. And then you see this process play out the way you thought it would, because you knew he was raw when you got him. You knew that it was going to take some time for him to get here. And now you see him getting here, and it's like, it's really cool to see, because you were hoping it would play out this way in your head, and you're watching it. It's great.
It's awesome. It's just like you said, this is not a surprise to what last year he did. I mean, it's as far as the lack of pass rush, because like you said, you're getting a raw guy. You look at the recent track history of guys that are edges. It's a little harder. You got to give him some time to bake a little bit on that. The fact that he carved out a role for me, Brendon, as the run defender he was, and as a run defender, he sets the edge awesomely. He still has an ability to be able to recognize the running back coming past him after he sets the edge, to bounce off the block and get to the tackle. This is something, of course, Gerald Taylor is just completely unable to do. Say nothing of not being able to root down like this guy does. When he is a run defender, his chase, his pursuit, the quickness he has to get to plays on the backside if he's left unblocked and still get down to track the play, because he does have that, what was a 10-yard split.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that is already a part of his game that I did not expect we were going to have to that level year one. That was a surprise on him, and that's only going to improve. And I think he will become a top 15 type edge run defender in this league. And already with Uchenna on the other side, very close to that himself, you start to see how the run game starts to hem itself up a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. And it allows Derek Hall to have his rookie season role of just kind of picking up whatever's left, which won't be a ton, but he's probably a player who's going to need some time as well, just like Mafe did. Yeah.
And that's when it comes to that, I don't have a problem with that, because I see it's two things. Number one, that's first world problems, Brendon, right? That's not the guys in the back end of the division don't have to deal with. Number two, much like having JSN land here a couple years after you took a second round pick, or Devin Witherspoon land here when you already had a stacked cornerback room, or Hall landing here when you already were 3 edges deep. When you run a draft by value base and not by need based, this is the result you get from that. And it's not a bad thing. Eventually, it makes the best, strongest, most talented team. But it means you're not looking to fill in holes to spots. You're just looking to get the best pure player for where you're picking in your position. And that's why we've been lauding these drafts of the Seahawks recently, because this is a big difference from where they were 3 and 4 and 5 years ago, in the respect of leaning so heavily, not just going to value slightly, but pick after pick after pick, it being about value. And that's where then you have the ultimate faith that Hall, even if he has to kind of get a cup of coffee this year in the heavily rotational role, he eventually will develop to be that guy, because you were leaning in to get the best player at your pick.
Right. Another guy who got kind of singled out by Pete today and has been getting a lot of shout outs this training camp was dre'mont. Now, I think we all kind of expected dre'mont, because he was a great player in Denver. We gave him a lot of money. That's the kind of the expectation for him to be really good. And he's looked really good so far. But I was thinking about this the other day. Do you think that Dre'Mont Jones is the best interior defensive lineman Pete has had in Seattle?
No, because he's not a complete enough player. Michael Bennett's been the best interior.
Was he inside? I always think of him as like an edge that would slide inside occasionally. Like, I don't look at Bennett as being an edge.
I mean, this is where we get to a little bit of the tough part of making this relation, because that's essentially what you have in a guy like Dre'Mont Jones. He's playing 4-eye. 4-eye is halfway between defensive tackle and defensive end in a 4-3 scheme. So, did you have as Michael Bennett an early edge? It was an early edge defender rundown and then kicked inside. Yeah, as far as pass rush downs, yeah, he was. But is this guy kind of still in a bit of a similar role in the alignment and what you ask him to do versus what you ask Michael Bennett to do? If you just ask about what their responsibility is, kind of the same. But this is where it gets hard when you're trying to relate. You've been running a 4-3 defense for years, and now you're trying to compare players from a 4-3 defense to a 3-4. Then on top of that, Brendon, traditionally with 3-4 players on the defensive line, those are space eaters and guys that just take up blocks. So they don't become usually penetrators or those kind of guys that are like Dre'Mont Jones that are troublemakers down there in a good way. And so then it gets really hard to find the comp or finding, like to your question, is this the most talented? It makes it tough because you just don't have much of a baseline then to go off of. So I guess in certain respects, yes, it absolutely is. He's a guy, I think, a little bit like Uchenna too, where you're maybe getting a guy who is very close to reaching the ceiling, but maybe has a little bit of a smidge of room left in their productivity to offer here, especially considering in Dre'Mont Jones, I've wondered a little bit with him of, you're a defender in that defense for Denver the last 3-4 years. That hasn't been an easy pull.
Yeah.
Because you've got an offense out there going 3 and out 24/7, and you're on that field far too many snaps, which eventually is going to remove down your effectiveness.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. I think when we signed him, I even did the breakdown of like looking at their offensive rankings since Dre'Mont's been there. It was like 29th, 29th. Last year was obviously last, 32nd. Like 23rd was, I think, I can't remember exactly, but it was bad. So that's a big thing because supposedly his weakness is as a run defender. And
this is what I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you take the thing is they're constantly having to defend against the run in Denver because they can't score. So other teams just kind of get to run the ball a lot. So if you put him on a team that can score and suddenly he gets to focus more on pass rushing, that's probably a big step in the right direction.
Agreed. And that's where that productivity goes forward. And I 100% in that role with the thought process on the run game. You as an offense are bad. You're now going to put your defense in a bind where they're on the field too much. Eventually, you're not scoring points. They're going to give up some points eventually because you and I have seen this with even our Seahawks defense at times in the past where, midway into the third quarter, if the offense has been non-functioning throughout the course of the game, that's about the point where the defense starts to give in, where they're getting gassed, where they start to like not be as strong as they were for the first 2.5 quarters. And it almost doesn't matter how strong a defense you have. If you get to the gas state, now you're going to get exposed. And I do think that if you look at Dre'Mont Jones's, let's just say PFF grade last year, you should build probably within about overall in the grade, a 5, 6, 7 point bump for him, considering the fact that, and I would almost for every just about, especially defensive line player on that Denver defense, because of how many extra snaps they had to be out there. And that it doesn't matter how good you are as a defense. There are only so many snaps you can play before you're eventually going to get gassed out and done. You've got to have some kind of balance to be able to still be impactful.
So yeah, I mean, definitely excited about that. Jaron Reed, nose tackle. What do you think about that one?
I love this one. I was hearing in my chat, you weren't as big on this one. I obviously he's not been good against the run in recent years, which is a basis to maybe think that this isn't going to work necessarily as much. In a video I put out a couple of days ago, just kind of relating this to a little bit of like a Javon Hargrave situation where interior defensive linemen, if they're going to choose at times to be pass rushers, sometimes they're making that choice and they have to make the choice of doing that at the cost of their ability to stop the run. Ndamukong Suh did this very same thing over the course of his career, where it becomes more about, look, I get paid for being an inside pass rusher. I'm not going to get paid for being a run stuffer. Snacks Harrison wasn't making any big, huge amount of coin for being a great run stuffer as a zero tech in there. But if you are a guy that goes out there, can put 5, 6, 7 sacks together, you can go get yourself $20, $30 million. And so he leaned into it, did Jaron Reed. He came out of Alabama as a 1-tech, 0-tech, who then leaned into becoming more of a 3-tech with the Seahawks because the Seahawks already had Tony McDaniel and Ataba Rubin at the time. So there was less of a need for the 1-tech. They slid him into that 3-tech role, said, pin your ears back and get after the quarterback. Don't worry about as much the run in that role. And he's leaned into that. But now you're going to transition him back into what I think is his roots, Brendon. And he's not a terribly old player. He still has that strength. He still has the 330-pound size to where he's got the size dimensions you want, the long arms you want. So he fits to those points. I think what he's just doing now is he's probably lost a half step as far as the quickness goes, going back to, I think, what his origins were. And I think that he's going to fit to it very well, actually, because I think he could do that well. It's just that there's not the value in the league to do that as much as there is to find the rarity, which is the guy that can actually provide some pressure from the inside.
I am interested to see how this works out. I will say that I heard about the thing about how he was a 1-tech out of Alabama. I'm definitely interested. And I will say this, in the modern NFL, it seems like the 400-pound nose tackle is starting to kind of go extinct, and there's more of a focus on having smaller and maybe slightly more athletic guys even down in the trenches. So maybe this is kind of like a move reflective of that.
Yeah,
I just don't know if Jaron Reed is capable of doing anything at that high of a level anymore, but maybe nose tackle is a position where you can just kind of get a guy who's just okay, and that's fine as long as you're taking care of things at these other positions.
I wouldn't think it if he wasn't just merely like a good run stuffer in college. If you go back and you read his scouting reports, I mean, there was one I was reading of Lance Erdline where it's, where he's got a glass ceiling as a pass rusher, but this guy is phenomenal as a run defender. He is on it. He can hold up in the point of attack. He's strong as hell. Like the whole thing reads like a guy you're drafting is just a run stuffing edge. And then you go back and look at his PFF numbers from his last two college years. And you look at his run defense, 87, and then his final year, it was 94. 94 PFF run grade in his final year at Alabama when they're winning national titles, by the way, at the same point in time. Meanwhile, if you look at those PFF grades as far as his pass rush numbers at Alabama, low. So this is back to my point on that whole thing. I mean, go look at Javon Hargrave and look at what he is as a run defender with the Steelers, and then go look at what he was as a run defender with the Eagles. A guy going into his prime, leaving the Steelers off that rookie contract, going into his prime with the Eagles, and he doesn't just merely become like somewhat bad as a run defender. I'm talking 35. I'm talking 40 grade for a season as a run defender, Javon Hargrave, a place that we should be looking to expose with this Niner team and them signing him this year. But I think these defensive tackles make a cognizant decision and they go, and I can understand why they do. But I think that's also why I'm so heartened by the thought process of him sliding back to being able to slide back, because he still has the skill set. He's got the old man strength. It's not relying on him being super twitchy or anything like that. And he did it at college, man, all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. Now, if this happens and Reed's the starting nose tackle, we then have an opening at the other defensive end spot. Apparently, Mario Edwards looks really good in camp so far, and I saw a couple clips where he was looking really good in the offensive line, defensive line drills. So is Edwards going to be the guy who steps in then, or are you looking outside the current roster?
Well, I think that you have your early rundown defense of the line, where obviously Jaron Reed and Edwards and Dre'Mont Jones is going to be your weak side defensive end, so he gets to kind of chase. That'll be your early down package. But the question here to me, that when you ask, that's the key part of the question is, what are we going to call it? And NASCAR, Cheetah, or whatever new name we want to apply to this package. What is our sub package going to look like? Because Mike Morris is in there, Miles Adams is in there, but would it look better with the Jadeveon Clowney? Would it be looking better with making potentially another trade out there to put into that spot instead of that? I have to feel like when I see John free up this money right now, Brendon, and you look through this roster, a question I'll pose to you, you look through this roster at places to upgrade, places that need help, places you can improve. There's not a lot of spots, and not just on having the starters, but you're pretty good depth wise. The two little spots you can maybe go to is middle linebacker and defensive line. And defensive line certainly at the forefront. So knowing Reed's kicking inside and you have one less of a need for a body at the zero tech, but now maybe one more of a need at the defensive end, it's actually easier to go find, I think, that defensive end who can have some impact than it would have been to go find the zero tech. It seems like there's less of those guys kicking around than there is the other.
Yeah. I crunched the numbers right after we restructured Diggs. And what I came up with was after everything, after all the cuts we're going to make before the season starts, we get down to 53. I took a guess at what the 53 might be. I took a guess at the practice squad. I accounted for all that, all the dead money we have to pay out to, we got like, $5,000 or $10,000 in signing bonuses to give out to various players. I think we have 7 million in space. So that even if the Seahawks want to carry some cap space in to the season, which of course they're going to want to do, probably somewhere around 3 million, maybe 4. That's enough money to go get somebody. It's not enough money to trade for Chris Jones or trade for DeForest Buckner. So I'm not really thinking about that.
Well, I mean, hold on. It is if you think about what the trade package compensation would look like for either of those two players. So, is it on just enough of that on the surface of it? No. But if we're talking about a fan, if we're talking about a Darrell Taylor included, if we're talking about, if I think about Kansas City, you could put together a creative package with Kansas City that's not necessarily pick-based heavy. It'd have some picks in it, but they have assets that you have assets that they might find. I don't think it's likely to happen. I think your whole point on this is still true, that it's not a likely scenario they make these big swings. Doesn't mean that they're inhibited from making them. I don't think so. Because if you start factoring in before we get into the season, me putting a package together of an Eskridge, Fant, and Taylor, and then putting picks together to go get Chris Jones, Now I can go sign him because I'm also saving money I'm saving $9 million more off the top with the packaging those players as part of the deal. And I would estimate that this team would probably try to look to deal from some of their strengths on those situations if they did.
Yeah, I can't see it. I can't see it happening. I don't know. Would the Chiefs even want Fant given the fact that their tight end situation is what it is? Like, I don't know about that.
Well, yeah, no, there absolutely is a way. You have Travis Kelce, who's played a ton of football. Go look at who their number 2 and their number 3 tight end are. Those aren't even marginally drafted guys. They're a team that's now leaned back into the short passing attack over the last year, the dinking and the dunking. It's no longer Patrick Mahomes just chucking it up down the field 55, 60 yards. So would they have a need for a guy that's an H-back tight end, a move tight end, whereas now Travis Kelce sliding back more into being an inline tight end and having 2 tight end sets they can call upon this year? Would that be of value to them? Yeah, I think that would be of value to them, especially if it's helping their offensive, especially if it's helping out Mahomes. I think they're looking to structure this more around Mahomes than they are looking to pay a defender $30 million a year as, Chris Jones is wanting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they're not interested in paying Chris Jones what he wants. Apparently, they're not even close. And he's already posting stuff acting like, yeah, I'm out of here. Like he did something on Instagram earlier today. I'm not convinced that we would be able to spin something up that would make it work. Buckner, maybe, because he's, I think, on a little bit of a lower tier. But I still kind of feel like if even with the stuff that you're talking about, you're going to have to also clear like you're going to restructure Disley. You might have to restructure Jamal Adams. You might need to add some void years. Like it would take a lot to make it all happen. And well, you could do it. I don't think they will though.
I don't think they will. This is the most important part is I don't think they will. Your point on that's 100% right. When it comes to thinking about what it is going to be the cost, before we get to like 30 million a year and all that, because we're just thinking about this in the process of, is it possible? When it comes to 30 million a year, that's not the number to concentrate on in this deal. The number to concentrate on in this deal is what is the first year cap hit going to be? Right. If I have a guy like Javon Hargrave that signed on a 4-year, $80 million deal at $20 million a year, and they can get that first year cap hit down to $5.5 million, how far down can I get the first year cap hit if I sign him to Chris Jones to a $28.5 million deal a year? How far? $8.5 more million versus off the Hargrave contract on a 4-year deal. How much more would it cost? Would it be 11 or would it be 10? I mean, and so that's when I say, yeah, you wouldn't have to do those other deals. If you include just Fant, Taylor, and Eskridge in the deal, that's we got $6 million for Fant. We've got $1 million for Darrell Taylor. You save that $7 million, and Eskridge is, I believe, $1 million as well. So let's say that's $8 million. That's pretty much almost the whole contract right there. You put that in tandem with the money you saved off Diggs, you could technically sign him to that deal. You'd have to structure in that way to make it work. But I'm guessing if Chris Jones gets the money that he's wanting per year, he's not going to be adverse to having the structure changed as long as he's getting his money. I'm not saying I want to do it or that it should be done or that but is it potential? It could happen. And the reason I kind of harp on it a bit, Brendon, is in doing the channel for a couple of years. When originally you're doing this channel, I presented Jadeveon Clowney. I said, what about us going to Houston and getting Jadeveon Clowney? We can't afford this. He's a franchise tag. There's no way you can afford him on that franchise tag. Oh, found a creative way to get that deal done. The Jamal Adams deal came down the track. There's no way we can get this Jamal Adams. There's no way. You found a way to go get it done. This team's had a track record of making aggressive trades around the training camp. You have a general manager who's clearing cap space as it stands right now. There's definitely a process here where you potentially could go down this road. And as you just talked about with that Chris Jones situation, it is the epitome of fluid at this point. Yeah, the Chiefs want to hold on to him. But another part of this is also, Brendon, have not the Chiefs shown you in recent years that there is no sacred cows outside of Patrick Mahomes? They have a year ago, they moved Tyreek Hill. And everybody's like, how could you get rid of him? He's a bedrock on you can't get rid of Tyreek Hill. Right around the same age of Chris Jones. This offseason, you had Orlando Brown, your left tackle. Isn't a left tackle kind of important for a franchise-level quarterback like Mahomes? But they let him walk as well because they didn't want to pay him. And you have Jones in a very similar place right now. So they've also, you know me, I'm a big guy in track record. Has this team been willing to do this in the past? Will they? And some of this has a little bit of adding up to me in my mind. Doesn't make it likely, but it does mean that there's a little bit to it from this that could make some sense. Last part I'll say on this, Brendon, is if there is a trade market for Chris Jones, it's not going to be a big market. He ain't going to the AFC. Chiefs aren't trading him there at all, right? You can agree with me on that. So no AFC, and then start going through the contenders list of teams in the NFC that actually would need defensive tackle help. No Cowboys, no Giants. You're not going to have the Rams coming into this because they don't have the money to spend. Cardinals aren't into this right now. There's actually only about 4 teams in the NFC in addition to Seattle that would even be in the market to potentially kick the tires on this kind of deal, which then we come back to, again, the cost to get him wouldn't be as great as we might think as far as the front end cost goes.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to whether or not the Chiefs value those players, Fant, Eskridge, Taylor. They would have to place some degree of value on those guys. And I don't believe the Colts would. I think all 3 of those players are basically worthless to the Colts. So if you're talking about the Buckner side of things, I still think it's too much. But Chiefs, maybe. It depends on just what they think of those players.
That's why I came to that with the Chiefs more than I came to with Buckner, was because I thought the value would be understood and those players a little bit more realized if you're having to keep them as part of the package because of the need for the backup tight end. If Kelsey goes down, you got nothing there behind Kelsey at the tight end position. When you look at their defensive end position, they lost Frank Clark this offseason. I believe they also lost the guy that played for us from the Cincinnati Bengals for a couple of years. He was in there as their backup edge as well. Whose name I'm totally spacing on. Dunlap. So they signed this guy, Omawu, from the Niners, who was like their rotational edge guy that came in and had a little bit, but that's not a fixture guy in there. And if you wanted to combo him up with Darrell Taylor, certainly the Chiefs have reached out to Seattle in the past to pluck a pass rusher from us before, haven't they? So, maybe the way that our scouts and their scouts view edge rushes maybe somewhat a little bit similar. And I look at Darrell Taylor and go, that's the perfect player to go to the perfect team there in the Chiefs, a team that's going to play from ahead a lot of the time, which means that his ability as a run defender and the need for him is lessened. And you're going to have more opportunities for him to pin his ears back and go back there and just have him pass rush and get after it a little bit. So when it comes to those 2 guys, and then when Eskridge, I've even thought this one thing through, Brendon. Who is the receiver right now for the Chiefs this year? Who is the guy they're hitching their wagons to?
Oh, it's Kadarius
Toney, who is the slot receiver type guy that we talk about. He can play some on the outside, but he is the guy that they're going to have him try to do a lot of his damage in the slot, take over the Juju Smith-Schuster role in a major way this year. Who's also a guy that just had to have cartilage cleaned out of his knee? Who's also the guy that's been injured every single almost moment of his pro career?
Yeah, I mean, well, Eskridge.
Well, Eskridge has been that way too. But what you do then is you go a 2-for-1. You say, okay, it's not that to me, Taylor and Eskridge and Fant will bring so much value in themselves to the Chiefs. They'll bring some. You're still going to have to throw some draft capital on the table. But then rather than it being a Jamal Adams situation where you're throwing all of this draft capital on the table and paying the player, maybe it's just some draft capital, and then you're augmenting it with some of the players if you made that kind of move. But if I'm the Chiefs, I'm looking for insurance for Kadarius Toney. And Eskridge isn't the best of insurance, but at the same point in time, he gives me an explosive type of player that I can fit into there that I need in this offense to roll.
Yeah, I think that the public perception of Eskridge is really, really dirt low. I think that he has about as much value as somebody like Gary Jennings Jr. at this point. It's just like zero, absolute nothing. You're just doing it as a salary dump, basically. It's like an NBA trade, which you usually don't see in the NFL. So it's like you're literally trading a guy just to make the salaries match, which I guess could happen. Again, I really don't think this is I don't think either trade will happen, to be clear. Also, for whatever it's worth, the Colts restructured Buckner earlier this offseason. So there would be a little bit of dead money if they traded him. There would have been zero dead money if they traded him before the restructure. So I think it would be weird for them to restructure him and then trade him. That would be, I mean,
Agreed.
they could do it, but it would be bad planning on their part. You would definitely look at that and go, wow, they didn't think anything through, I guess.
Well, and it's the only way they might be doing that too, is if they start to have a little bit of the thing twisting in the direction it's going. Like they've already had a season-ending injury, and it seems like they've had some weird luck here out the gate in training camp. That's maybe worth monitoring because they're going to be starting Anthony Richardson this year, and I don't know how you can look at that team if you're a Colts front office player and say, well, we're going to play this Anthony Richardson who has 13 starts under his belt, who's incredibly young, and expect that we're going to go out there and actually make noise in this really strong AFC. I think the Colts would be very smart to take a bit of a page out of the Rams book in this, but you're right. The fact that they restructured this seems to be an indication that that's not what they want to do. And I think they're stupid for doing it because they should be trying to maximize the turn on the rebuild here rather than trying to be middle of the road for no particular good reason.
Yeah, I blame the Eagles for this. I think what the Eagles did is made every other team in the league think like we could do that because they went from worst team in the league to a playoff team to the team that went to the Super Bowl in year, and every other team is like, hey, that could be us. We shouldn't sell our good players. We could turn it around next year.
If
I,
if you're the
that's what I
Colts
feel
right
like.
now, though, I think it's a good point on your part there. If you are the Colts right now, though, and Taylor gets to such a pain in the butt level that you have to move Taylor, is there any way you can be looking at the team and still thinking that?
I mean, I wouldn't, but I think they would. I think they would be like, hey, the Eagles did it. The Eagles did it. Whatever else you want to say, they can just say the Eagles did it. It's like this trump card
Yeah.
of that Jim Irsay would definitely fall for because he's Jim Irsay.
Yeah. No, I could see it. Jim Mercy's a live wire, man. Yeah,
Mhm.
that guy's definitely on one that's like, rolling through. But I do wonder if their situation could get in a little place where suddenly they're like the way we viewed this a couple months ago versus where this is now. Say nothing of being around the trade deadline. If they come to find themselves piss poor around the trade deadline and 1-5 or whatnot, are they a little more open at that point? Maybe. I think that the real likelihood of what you're driving to, though, Brendon, and I think that I do agree with it's fun to talk about Jones to me. It's fun to talk about what it would take to do it. But I think that we got to look more to like a Leonard Williams type or a Grover Cleveland. If you're going to look for an Indianapolis Colts defensive lineman, Grover Cleveland's probably the better one to go take a look
Is
at.
his name actually Grover Cleveland?
I think it's something else, but that's what I call him. It's something like that.
I wish it
It's close
was.
to, it's
I would
close
trade.
to,
I would definitely trade for him if his name was Grover Cleveland. That'd be
it's a,
great.
it's something like that. It's one of those names that just you easily forget the second you read it. But he's he's one of the better run stuffing nose tackles you got in the sport. You can
Yeah.
find out there. So I mean, that's probably more. We got to start to like myself included on this, Brendon. Less of the starry eyes and probably more. But I'll tell you, when John frees up the money, he's freed up, and the team has flexibility. If they made some big move before training camp with some of the players on the books who you could offset in a trade, it does get me thinking a little bit with John's track record, especially.
Mhm. Yeah, you could trade for somebody on that level for sure. We have enough money for that. There's also enough money to just pick up somebody who's still out there because there are actually a few defensive linemen who have lasted way longer than I thought. Shelby Harris, Akeem Hicks, Matt Ioannidis, which shocks me that he's still out there. I don't know what's going on there, but I like Ioannidis. So
I
you
think,
could
yeah.
spend a few $1,000,000 there.
Yeah, I got no problem with any of those players, and if they pick them up, that's perfectly fine additions. I think that would help this team out. I'd love to see them get something a little more impactful if they could, but can't deny it's not going to hurt to go that route. And you may not need impactful at this point with what you have
Mhm.
stacked up on the defensive side of the ball.
Right. So that's about it in terms of like things they could add to the team. I don't think they're going to add an inside linebacker. One of the guys they could have considered just got picked up, Quan Alexander. He got picked up by, I think, the Steelers 3 days ago or something. And I don't think they were
He's
going to do
done.
that. Yeah.
Quan's done as a player. He's been shot. I love Joker down there, and shout out to you, Joker. I was probably the other night. I was having to leave on the stream quick, so I wasn't able to answer his question really fully. But I think I like Joker's suggestion of Clowney more than those others for this reason, is that I believe that Clowney can give you some versatility between playing a little bit of stand up outside linebacker, and I think he can play inside as a 4-eye guy in the 3-4. And so I like that even more than those other suggestions because of that. And I think the money would be just about the same.
Bounty is a 4-eye. That's something I didn't really think about. That's interesting. That's something I wasn't really thinking about, but that's compelling.
So it's essentially what you done with Mike Morris. They're the same size. You're doing the same kind of thing with Mike Morris and moving him into that spot. So and again, given that flexibility is good, edges can get beat up. We got Daryl Taylor in a sling right now. Say nothing of maybe a trade that you might make to, if you did that. So I just like that one a little bit better if you could do it. He's also got familiarity with the program. He's going to know what time it is. And boy, he played really well for us on the first stop around here. I'm not going to throw shade at a player who can't make it work in Cleveland.
Yeah, I guess the issue with Clowney would just be all the injuries. You feel like you're really playing Russian roulette, and there are 3 bullets in that chamber with that. But I mean, honestly, the other guys you could get, they're so old. You could say this similar thing. Like at this point, is Shelby Harris really a lock to play 17 games? Probably not.
He was beat up pretty good last year. He played good for you when he was in, but he was out a good amount. They struggled to keep him on the field.
All right, so that's about it for the main stuff that has stuck out to me at training camp, except BBK's back. He took 2 years off, but he's back, so that's pretty cool. That's fun to see.
It is. I'm going to be interested to see how he fits into a 3-4 to 5'10 linebacker size because he's legit 5'10, right? Like
Yeah,
he's
he's
not in that.
undersized for sure.
And so I'm a little worried with him on how does that work, taking on second level blocks that are just going to swallow him like, the sun. He's
Yeah.
he's the earth, they're the sun a little bit at times. But look, if they route him into just being a special teams guy, he doesn't hurt in that respect. We know he's a plus special teams player, and
Exactly.
that's certainly something that's a value to us. So it's linebacker is one of those interesting spots to take a look at right now. That is not sure where we're going to be at landing at the end of the day. And I'll tell you, I've been going back watching Taylor along with the all 22 stuff on other stuff. The Brooks coverage stuff, Brendon.
Yeah. One thing I did this offseason was go through a lot of player rankings that like various websites did, PFF, ESPN. There were a couple other sites as well. And of course the the NFL top 100. Brooks constantly gets so much credibility in these lists.
Yeah.
And whenever I see it, I just say, okay. And then I move on.
I mean,
I don't get it. I don't understand it.
I don't either. On the top 100, I think he was like 101 and DK was like 102 too on the top
something
100.
like that.
And I just some of the all 22 shots that I'm putting together a video of it, and it's not going to be a fun video because there's some just horrific moments there with Brooks in coverage where you're just like, dude, what are you looking at? What are you doing? Like how did you lose it on this guy? How did you get confused on this thing? You pick up the crosser. It's coming across the field. Pick the crosser up. And he just stands there and just be staring at the quarterback. And then the quarterback throws the easy completion on the crosser that ran right across his face. I mean, right across his face. Or you're seeing San Francisco with Shanahan. Shanahan's got Brooks down right now because he knows that Brooks wants to buy in on the run or any of the stuff around the line of scrimmage. So there's remember the one play in San Francisco in the game against us in Seattle where Purdy does a fake throw out to the flat route, and then he comes back to the middle of the field, and Brooks is completely bought in on the play to take in the flat route. It ain't even a run play. He's just heading to try to go take care of the flat, and he lets Kittle get right in behind him. I hope Brooks can improve in his pass coverage stuff because there's some brutal moments, man.
Well, I don't think Brooks is going to play very much this year. Like they said, the timetable on the injury was a year, and he got injured on like January 2nd. So you do the math. I'm not really thinking about Brooks that much this year.
It's possible. I will say Pete was saying that with all of those guys, they had the Fant, Adams, Brooks, and a couple other guys that were on that Monet on that PUP point. He was saying with all of those guys that they had him running full steam, and they were just getting him into a position at this point to be able to practice. We had Kelly Narc Diaries in here. Kelly was letting me know when she was watching practice field the other day that Brooks was out there actually looking faster than Adams, that he was just running full speed, looking like he was cutting. He was going like crazy. So I mean, it is possible. You're right. Him getting back this fast is insane with how late in the season he had it. You look at him versus like Penny. Remember Penny had his injury at the same time of the year and then couldn't get back the whole year and back forward through. So I would, it'd be tremendous if Brooks can pull that off. And it will help him too. I think Brendon getting more into that sort of weak side middle linebacker role in the 3-4 where you're not the strong side guy and you don't have to make the calls, and that stuff probably going to make him better as a player too. But he still has a lot of room to grow when it comes to, he's a great run defender. He can hit, he can tackle pretty well. But the coverage stuff is just,
it sounds like V Jones might be actually the guy who's stepping up to maybe be a backup interior linebacker in this league. And he's got the size. He's like 6'2", 235 now, supposedly.
Yeah, he's been one of the guys you're hearing as a name coming up in camp quite a bit, even more so than Bush.
Yeah. So is there anything else from the first week of training camp that stands out to you that we haven't talked about yet?
I think the fact they're working on screens is encouraging offensively. I loved hearing that they've really been hammering the screen game, and that's something that's been another one of those things like the 3 wide receiver sets from McVay that you haven't implemented as much in this offense with Waldron here, onboarding. So that was the part that kind of jumped out to me a little bit, and just they're kind of getting a little bit of the details. McIntosh obviously looks like a complete steal in the 7th round, whatever he's going to be as far as the capacity this upcoming year. I reckon we're going to find him some touches, and this guy's going to help us out. And to get him in the 7th round, I think we're going to look back in this draft and say, I think Oluwatimi. Remember, I told you on him when he was drafted. My strong take on that one was this guy was going to start sooner than later this year. Evan Brown's not bad. It's more about how good I liked Oluwatimi and what I thought he could do, and the fact that he's already fitting in there with first team reps now before we've gotten to preseason games, I think shows the coaches are having that confidence in him to potentially start him here in this rookie year, being that first rookie center starter in the Coach Carroll era.
Yeah, I have him as an underdog, but he's in play. He's definitely in play. They are giving him a chance. They're alternating days, I think, where he's the running with the ones. So they're taking this seriously. So you got to like that.
He's just not your typical center or your typical rookie. And this is a guy that's played a lot of football, and it's a guy that's a real heady, smart player who's going to be very advanced from the neck up coming in day one. And that would be the main preventative thing keeping a rookie center off the football field is their ability to process upstairs, get the protections right, know what they need to do, just, play in and play out as their job responsibility goes. And not to mention he fits from just a pure schematic standpoint with all of the movement-based stuff and hitting the reach blocks and getting to the second level stuff. So we'll see if that does play out. But that did catch a little bit of my eye, Brendon, when I saw that bit of a note put out there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a pretty good roundup of this training camp stuff. I think that's a pretty good roundup of where the team stands right now. So I think the plan is next week on Tuesday, we link up to talk a little bit about the first preseason game. I mean, previewing a preseason game is kind of weird, right? But we're going to do the best that we can. Mm-hmm. And we're getting off to the races. Well, we'll also have the mock game to talk about maybe because that's tomorrow night. But I think that covers everything we want to talk about today.
Yeah, I agree. I think we kind of captured it really well. And we'll be doing, folks, too. Me and Brendon are going to be doing a lot more kind of looking at some of the draft prospects a little bit ahead of time, too, as we get in the season on this stuff. So that'll be as we get closer into the season and stuff on those things, trying to look out ahead with some of that stuff.
Yeah, so we went for a good 2 hours plus tonight. We peaked around like 250, 260 viewers. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. We are back on the wagon, and before long, we're going to be doing a twice a week again. It's going to be the regular season. We're going to have nonstop stuff to talk about. So, Brendon, thank you for coming on by. Thank you for taking part tonight. And can't wait to do it again.
Thanks for having me as always, man. I'm looking forward to the season. Biggest and baddest B&B shows ever. So let's go.
Yeah, and can't wait for the season. The season's right about here. And there's really only one thing left to do tonight, I think. There's one thing we got to take care of.
Can't forget.
Just one last consideration. We got to say it. We got to remember. It's been a while for some of us. I know.
They'll forget if you don't let them know, man. They'll forget. I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.